All right, we are back with NBA coverage, and in this one, we'll be covering action from March the 3rd up to this past Sunday. Moving on, we're starting out with the Hawks. They went 5-3 over this stretch, starting out on March 3rd with a 2-point victory against the Grizzlies, in which I believe that they also managed to keep the streak of Memphis losing close games within the final seconds going, as they got a game-winning shot of their own, with Caris LeVert getting a game winner at the buzzer with a layup. And in this one later on, he had a great performance off the bench, finishing with 25 points, 5 assists, and 3 steals on 11 of 19 shooting. It was actually Zachary Rizalche that led the way for them, though, as he got 27 points and 4 steals in 32 minutes of play on 11 of 13 shooting with 5 threes. Trae Young had 15 assists, but struggled to shoot overall from the field, though he did still finish with 12 points. Then in the next matchup, they would lose to the Bucks by 6. Despite Trae Young putting up 28 and 13. They did get back-to-back victories by scoring over 120 points in both matchups, as they would beat the Pacers in Atlanta on both occasions. In the first one, it was George Niang that led in scoring with 24 points. But Trae Young also contributed 16 assists of his own, along with 22 points and 3 rebounds on 7 of 17 shooting. And Onyeka Okongwu, in a starting spot, had 20 points, 13 rebounds, and 2 assists. It is just great to see that they have finally chosen to give him a shot and bring Clint Capella off of the bench. Since they've done that, he has literally been producing well. That had been the case anyways. But now to have greater access to it, it could help them. And honestly, with the way they've been doing, it has, for the most part. They would go on to win 2 more games, one against the 76ers, and then the next against the Hornets on March 12th, in which Trae Young put up 35 points and 12 assists on 7 of 20 shooting. No threes, but he made all 21 of his free throws. Definitely adept at being able to draw contact as far as this particular game goes. It's been a struggle for him for most of his career, but that is something. I mean, anytime your team is shooting from the line that much and that efficiently at an 89.7% clip aided by him, you, along with the fact that they forced turnovers and they were able to convert off of them effectively and get in transition, that just made this a heavy mismatch for the Hornets. So that would conclude a 4-game win streak. And then in their next 2 matchups, they would suffer losses to the Clippers by 23 and the Nets by 8, despite Trae Young adding yet another double-double with points and assists, putting up 28, 12, 6, and 2 steals on a pretty efficient game. 9 of 18 from the field, 3 threes. Onyeka Okongwu with another 21-point, now 15 rebound performance. And Zachary Rizalche with 16 points as well. They are now 7th in the Eastern Conference with that positive stretch. If they can maintain that to some extent, they will probably make the play-in. That's just how this is gone. But time will tell. There are only a couple more weeks or so left for them to really make that additional push. Now, moving on to the Celtics, who over this stretch of time have been 6-1. they were able to beat the Trailblazers by 10 while setting NBA history. In this matchup, Derek White, starting the game, would put up 41 points, 2 assists, and 3 steals. And then off the bench, Peyton Pritchard would have 43 points, 10 rebounds, and 5 assists. Those are career highs for those players respectively, and they both shot well from the field. 14 of 20 and 10 threes for Peyton Pritchard, and 14 of 26 with 9 threes for Derek White. They are the first duo to put up 40 points as a career high in the same game. And they are the first NBA duo to have 9 or more threes in a ball game in NBA history as well. And to be honest, they needed every ounce of that. They had no Jason Tatum in this one, so someone had to assume a leadership role in the squad. And it seems like they did a great job of answering the call, especially when nobody else was. You look at Jaylen Brown playing this ball game, but he had 18 points on 7 of 23 shooting. And then Al Horford had 12. They were a little undermanned, and yet, with that kind of prowess from beyond the arc with just those two, combined with better proficiency at the line and an ability to crash the glass, that created enough distance for them to come out on top. They would then take on the 76ers. I watched the first half of this ball game, and the 76ers, to their credit, just as most of these games have gone, for a little bit, just a little bit of time, it felt as though they would be able to make things close. But at the end of the first quarter, the Celtics started distancing themselves completely, creating enough separation to where even if the 76ers were able to get a couple shots here and there, they couldn't string any momentum together for a consistent period of time. And ultimately, at the end of the first half, it was a 64-46 ball game. Turns out that I would only watch the first half of that ball game, and things just got incredibly worse from there for them. They could not do anything at all. The third and fourth quarter saw even scoring for both teams. Literally. And if you're the 76ers, you're already at a disadvantage given the sheer situation that you're in, the severity of that. You're trying to go toe-to-toe in scoring with this squad, and they've already been spotted 18 points by your shoddy defense. They stood no chance of coming back. Now, Jason Tatum was playing in this one, and he would put up 35 points, 7 rebounds, and 3 steals on 14 of 23 shooting, along with 5 threes. Peyton Pritchard had 19 off the bench, and Baylor Shireman, the rookie from Creighton, actually got some quality playing time in this one, getting 15 off the bench. The fact that Torrey Craig, of all people, can come in off the bench and put up 12 points as well is an issue, even though this man would be on some fuck shit at times. It all came together for him. Like, literally, I don't know, man. Craziness, man. Then, the very next game, they would take on the Lakers in yet another game I watched. And it looked for a while as though the Celtics would have control, but to be honest, for a little while there to enter the fourth quarter and kind of progress into that a little bit, the Lakers were making some strides. To just kind of tap into that, they were making some strides. There was a 26-12 run over the course of that time. And then something very huge for them took place. But I will get to that a little later on. Nonetheless, the way that they were able to hound Luka Doncic in the first half of that ball game eventually paid off for them, because in that time they mounted enough of a lead to where even with regressing for that portion of time, once they were able to figure things out again, they were all set. They would win 111-101, with Jason Tatum putting up 40 points, 12 rebounds, and 8 assists. They could not stop him. He was exploiting all the mismatches. They would have Austin Reeves on him sometimes, and that was just light work for him. Fade shots were getting hit by him, and they continued to leave him open from three. Jaylen Brown also had 31 points on 13 of 25 shooting, along with 6 boards. They would play the Jazz on March 10th and win by 6, with Sam Hauser putting up 33 points somehow. Then on March 12th, they would lose to the Thunder by 6, with Jason Tatum putting up 33 points of his own and 8 rebounds with 8 assists on 12 of 23 shooting. Derek White also had 22, and Al Horford had 18 with 6 threes. But the fact that Jaylen Brown struggled in this one, shooting just 5 of 15 from the field, and also the fact that down the stretch, the Celtics could not play their own brand of basketball. They literally got beaten at their own game by Oklahoma City. And they also could not respond accordingly. I mean, 20 of 63 shooting. They clearly had the volume and they made more threes. But the craziest thing is, they literally, for a second, they shot just 16% from deep in the second half as a team. It was a 3-point ball game at halftime, ironically enough, in the Thunder's favor. If just a few more shots dropped, who knows what could have happened from there. But to take that many attempts and be that drastic from out there when it counts, that was huge. And that ultimately sunk the Celtics. They would then get back-to-back wins against the Heat and Nets. Of course, Porzingis was actually out with a viral illness over the stretch, but he did return in this game against the Nets, which they won by 2 on March 15th, with him putting up 24 points in 32 minutes of play on 9 of 16 shooting. That 1 of 7 from 3 is a bit sloppy, but he hasn't played in a while, so you excuse that. Peyton Pritchard had 22 off the bench, and Jason Tatum had 20 points, along with 8 rebounds and 8 assists yet again. Drew Holiday also added 11 points and 12 assists. 5 of 12 shooting is horrible, but facilitating the ball to where you have a 6-to-1 assist-to-turnover ratio in a close game like that is pretty fucking good. Moving on to the Nets, and since March 4th, they have had quite the schedule, sometimes playing multiple back-to-back games. That stretch has caused them to go 2-7 over this time, with concurrent losing streaks of 4 capped off with the one prior to their first win against the Hornets, before somehow beating the Lakers on March 10th, despite them not having even remotely any talent to match up with a depleted Lakers roster still. You win that game by 3 points with really team play. No one got over 20 points for them. But at the end of the day, they had a little bit of control over what the Lakers were able to do over the course of this game. They managed to hit more shots when it counted. They were able to force a load of turnovers once again, with them being able to completely hound Luka Doncic in the same way that the Celtics were able to, like I talked about in their segment. That's definitely rough, though. A 3-game losing streak since March 4th, and then another 3-game losing streak to follow that up, pretty much. With losses to the Cavs by 5, the Bulls by 6, and then the Celtics by 2, as I just mentioned. And I guess a little bit before this game, news would break that despite him getting some burn for the first time in quite a while, after this stretch, the Nets would no longer have Cameron Thomas. He would be ruled out for the rest of the season due to a hamstring injury. Something tells me that a lower body injury was keeping him out for quite a while, as it already was. And now, when you're trying to make some sort of final push, maybe, just like that, it's truly finished for him. It hasn't necessarily been an optimal stretch of time for him. Was barely able to play this season. And even if he did play in every match, would it have fully helped them, seeing as they are now 23-45? I don't know. But yeah, a 2-6 stretch since March 4th certainly does not help your cause. Like, jeez, man. And Cameron Johnson, I mean, at least he, in this latest match against the Hawks on the 16th, managed to take the load and get the 8-point victory, as I mentioned, with them overcoming Trae Young's contributions and having Cameron Johnson put up 28 points of his own on 7 of 16 shooting, along with Keon Johnson in 29 minutes, putting up 22 points on 8 of 20 shooting. They shot relatively well from the field and from deep, shooting 48.6% from the outside. But yeah, there's just not a way for them to really make anything happen now. Again, they are deep in the rebuild. At least they now understand that. And at the very least, unlike the case was, you're in a better spot than you were to start out the season. Because at least now, with the trade deadline passing, they did acquire some assets that could help them in terms of draft compensation. They're going to need every ounce of that. Because this team has got to be retooled. Has to be. All right, moving on to the Hornets, who, over the course of this time, have continued to be a porous-ass defense. I'm not going to lie to you. Let's just call it what it is. Still, with that being said, they went 3-5 over this time. They had 3 straight losses to open things up. Obviously, an 18-point loss to the Warriors, despite Miles Bridges putting up 35 points on relatively good efficiency from the field. 11 of 20 shooting, 4 of 9 from deep. Like, this would be a theme for this stretch. There were multiple games where Miles Bridges just went completely crazy. Now, obviously, things tailed off for the entire team when they faced off against the Timberwolves and lost by 15, despite LaMelo Ball putting up 28, 10, and 6 in this ball game on 11 of 28 shooting. Certainly inefficient, and it might have affected their ability to come back from this deficit. You're going to shoot that much and be that inefficient, you're bound to lose games by double digits. Still, this loss against the Cavs on March 7th had to be absolutely heartbreaking. It came down to the final shot, which was missed by Miles Bridges. Now, it wouldn't have had to be that way if Evan Mobley didn't clutch up towards the tail end of the ball game and eventually do the work that needed to be done to get the Cavs in position to come back from quite the large deficit and hole that they were facing against the Hornets in the first place, which I found absolutely weird. Nonetheless, with the free throws that Donovan Mitchell would sink, the Cavs would win it by 1, despite Miles Bridges putting up 46 points, career high for him, and 8 rebounds on 15 of 32 shooting, along with 4 threes, and 12 of 13 shooting from the stripe. They shot better from the field and got more opportunities on the offensive end. But man, oh man. I mean, I'll be getting to the Cavs in a second. But yeah, anytime you allow a team to go to the line 51 different times in any ball game, and then you allow them to hit 43 of them, that is a glaring reason why they ended up winning the ball game. At least for the Cavs. Especially given the fact that I mentioned that Donovan Mitchell sealed it up with his own. It's like, dude, that just can't happen. They would rip off back-to-back wins of 105 to 102 scores against the Nets, and then the Heat with Miles Bridges averaging 31 or around 30.5 technically points per game in these particular matchups, and Mark Williams also gave them some good minutes in both. Then they would, as I mentioned, lose by 13 to the Hawks on March 12th, despite Miles Bridges putting up 31 points, yet again, with 11 rebounds on 11 of 19 shooting and 5 of 8 from deep. The Hornets also got random help from Daquan Jeffries getting 20 points in a starting role on 8 of 15 shooting. But anytime that he can be your third option, you have problems. For the Hornets, things would culminate in this matchup against the Spurs. Now, yes, it's bad on bad for entirely different reasons as it pertains to these teams. But the Hornets and the Spurs got into a complete barn burner. They could not stop each other to save their lives. The Hornets, if anything, with how this game looked, it appears they just got lucky that the Spurs missed sometimes. Because they won this game with a final score of 145 to 134. This game combined for the second most total three-pointers in a game in NBA history, while the Hornets also managed to shoot damn near 60, 57, and 90 splits on the court in this game. Both teams were relatively even in crashing the glass, though the Hornets did struggle in being able to stop them in transition. But a lot of garbage time production could be identified here. I mean, they had a 15-point advantage in the fourth quarter of the Spurs. So the Hornets definitely had them in a complete and total box for just a little bit, but still, that's atrocious. 27 points and 15 assists for LaMelo Ball to lead the way for the starters on 9 of 13 shooting and 7 of 11 shooting from deep. Though not to be outdone by much, Arkansas guard Nick Smith Jr. would come into the ball game off the bench as a sixth man and put up 26 points, 5 assists, and 3 rebounds of his own on 9 of 12 shooting with 6 made threes. Miles Bridges would have 21, and Mark Williams would have 14 and 10. Josh Green even got some burn for the first time in quite a while and put up 20 points on 7 of 11 shooting with 6 threes made in 28 minutes of play. They lost to the Clippers by 35. Mark Williams led in every category, which could be good in some games, but it was certainly problematic here. 5 of 18 shooting for LaMelo Ball, 3 of 10 shooting for Miles Bridges, and 2 of 11 shooting for Daquan Jeffries. Again, I question why Daquan Jeffries is even getting starting minutes. He played the most minutes out of anybody on the team. But if you're going to be a complete and total ghost and then black hole on the defensive side of the basketball, that certainly affected the team in pretty much every way you could think of. That is just bad. I mean, oh my gosh. All right, moving on to the Bulls. And they did not have a nationally televised game during this stretch. But they did manage to go on and put together a 4-2 stretch between March 4th and March 16th, essentially. They opened with a loss to the Cavs by 22, and they closed with a loss to the Rockets by 3. They did rip off 4 straight wins, including a game against the Magic in which Coby White put up 44 points and managed to shoot 16 of 28 from the field with 7 threes. Josh Giddey had 19 points, 13 rebounds, and 9 assists, while Trey Jones also had 20 points on 7 of 12 shooting. They shot 50% from the field overall, made 6 more threes, and were able to crash the glass and buy themselves a few more opportunities. Just enough to knock off the Magic. And it took a game-sealing shot from Coby White with 1 minute and 28 seconds left to go in the ball game. From there, both teams played strong defense on each other. Things could have gotten very interesting with that, but the Bulls were able to pull out the win there. They then won against the Heat by 5, with Josh Giddey putting up 26 and 12. They also beat the Pacers by 18, with Josh Giddey putting up 29 in this one, and then won against the Nets by 6, with Coby White putting up 31 points, and Zach Collins even grabbing 9 rebounds off the bench, along with 9 points. All right. Moving on to the Cavs, who over this time went 6-1. If the last stretch of time after the All-Star break up to the March 3rd date showed just how great the Cavs have been this season in pretty much every context, then this extended it. Still winning in any way you can think of. Whether they were facing adversity or whether they were just blowing out teams. I mean, they started out with winning by 22, as I just mentioned, against the Bulls, with Donovan Mitchell putting up 28 points and even Jared Allen grabbing 17 boards. I watched a good portion of this game against the Heat, where despite Bam Adebayo's best efforts, and despite giving up a lot of free opportunities at the line, the Cavs were able to battle back late and come away with the 5-point victory. Now, involving the Heat wasn't without controversy, per se, but I will get around to that. In any case, in this one, Donovan Mitchell had 26.7 rebounds and 5 assists on 8 of 17 shooting. And then from there, you had 5 other players put up double digits, with DeAndre Hunter having 16. The problem in this one was that they couldn't space the floor. For a while there, Donovan Mitchell was the only individual to make a 3-point shot. They turned that around at the right time and got into playing some solid defense down the stretch to ultimately create the separation that they would need to come away with the win. As I mentioned, they got a 1-point victory against the Hornets despite facing a large deficit there. And then they would face off against the Bucks, where in it they won by 12 on that Sunday matchup. Coming into that game, Milwaukee had been on a horrible streak that I'll detail, getting around to them against top 3 opponents in the Eastern Conference. And let's just say that later on, they would prove exactly why they aren't able to win these kinds of games. The Cavs were able to go on multiple runs late, including one of 18-5, to ultimately close this out, where even though nobody, and I mean absolutely no one, really played all that well when you think about it, but the team effort was great enough to come out with the win. I mean, just 44.3% shooting from them overall, and then 40.4% from deep. Obviously, with those kinds of threes compared to what the hell the Bucks were doing, that gave them the advantage. No player had over 20 points. Max Strus led the way, ironically enough, with 17, and they won by 12. Had a lead larger than that before the Bucks went to put together some garbage time points. That's ridiculous. And with this, 110 points would be a mark that the Cavs would reach in, up to that point, 14 straight victories, which was a historic mark there. Also, they would mention during the game that Kenny Atkinson was on pace to set a record in NBA history as the winningest head coach in their first season with a team. He was sitting at 84% at the time, and Bill Sharman had the same percentage of games won in his first year as a head coach with, I believe, the Celtics. Then the Cavs would have to take on the Nets, where they won by 5. Then on March 14th, they would face off against the Grizzlies in a game that they won by 9, with Evan Mobley leading the charge this time. And that's the crazy thing about it. It doesn't always have to be Donovan Mitchell, and they were still putting together this win streak, with this now extending up to 16 after Evan Mobley had 22 points, 11 rebounds on 9 of 16 shooting, and Darius Garland had 20 points, along with multiple players, now 7 overall in this one, having double-digit ball games. They won at the line and they were able to get a slight edge in terms of converting off of turnovers. So you'll take that any day of the week. But 16 straight victories ultimately helped them extend their reign as the very first team in NBA history to record multiple 15-plus game winning streaks in a single season. In a game that I covered briefly, that was nationally televised, but I didn't watch as March Madness overlapped with it, was the Magic and Cavs ball game. Now, in this one, as I was tracking it, I saw that the Magic, at a time, were able to make things much closer than I anticipated. And ultimately, as the fourth quarter would get underway, it just remained a neck-and-neck ball game. Eventually, after a few possessions and a few minutes of back-and-forth basketball, the Magic would take the lead in, by and large, the game by 5 points, to my surprise. It ended their streak despite the effort of Jared Allen and Donovan Mitchell in this one. But ultimately, with Mitchell shooting 9 of 28 from the field, and then DeAndre Hunter also going 2 of 11 overall, along with 1 of 5 from deep, if those shots are not falling and the game happens to be that close, it's certainly going to suck. But that is how the game is played. When it counts, you have to try to hit them. They were able to dominate in the paint, but that still wasn't enough for them. Still, they are sitting well ahead of the competition. 56-11. They are set. There's no way to argue that. They are so good, man. Like, that stretch is rough for sure, but oh my goodness. You know, like, they'll be all right. Oh yeah, before I get into it, I guess I did not cover it in the video prior, but it would be stated that LeVar Ball would have his foot amputated after a medical issue. Obviously, it's been a while to this point, and you really just hope that he's continuing to do well and recover after it. Because anytime you have to lose something like that, that's definitely difficult. But it seems like with some of what he's been up to, I think he's okay. So, you know, you will take that. All right, moving on to the Mavericks. And they have had a very weird stretch of time. They've had some players in some of the weirdest ways emerge as pretty solid contributors. And still, despite all of those efforts, over this time, they have managed to go 1-7. In a game that I did not watch, they lost to the Kings by 24 on March 3rd. Just absolutely got their asses kicked, allowed the Kings to be as proficient as they wanted to be. And I'll explain that, their side of it, when I get around to them. But for the Mavericks to shoot just 26.9% from 3 and make just 7 of them, you already lost at that point. What makes things even worse for them is that the starters did not do a damn thing at all. Now, I did bleed into this game by covering the fact that Kyrie Irving did go out with an injury in this one that would ultimately cost him the rest of this season. As tough as that is, what the hell was everybody else doing? I mean, Kyrie Irving, think about this. He managed to play 9 minutes still and got 5 points in that time, along with an additional 2 at the line because they brought him back in temporarily to shoot the free throws and then get back out. They ended the game with 7 points in just 9 minutes of play. Dwight Powell played 10 minutes, 22 minutes for Dante Exum and Kessler Edwards, and Klay Thompson played 25. And every single one of them put up less points in more time to work with. I mean, Kessler Edwards, honestly, you don't expect him to score like that. He just doesn't know how to. But he made all of his shots at least. As far as the other guys go, you had Dwight Powell just get 1 bucket to go. You had Klay Thompson go 1 of 4 shooting. And then you had Dante Exum shoot 2 of 10 from the field for 5 fucking points. Pitiful stuff. Most of the production in this game came off the bench, with them being so depleted that the Mavericks decided to bring in Kai Jones. And he led the way for them. Now, it didn't end up mattering, but 21 points for a guy that has been moved around as consistently as he has been now to this point is actually not half bad. You also had Najee Marshall put up 18 points off the bench on 7 of 13 shooting. It's safe to say that you would hear, again, as I alluded to with my statement earlier in this segment, you would see a lot of Najee Marshall out of seemingly nowhere. I mean, they would play the Bucks on March 5th and then proceed to lose that game by 30. With them not even being able to account for Giannis, which makes sense. Even with Kai Jones being some kind of a presence, he still would be injured for this game, leaving them completely screwed. Because, let's be honest, Dwight Powell is not doing a damn thing to stop Giannis, and that is exactly what happened. They would give Najee Marshall the start in this one, and he would put up 22 points. Klay Thompson led the way with 28 points, though, on 11 of 27 shooting. And Brandon Williams off the bench would have 14 points. Keep Brandon Williams in mind, too. Without fail, the next game against the Grizzlies would actually see them keep things competitively for a while. They belted out to a 9-point edge after the end of the first quarter and had a 24-12 run overall in this one. But they ended up just crumbling completely in the fourth quarter, losing by 16 overall points in that one and ultimately losing by 11. This is with Najee Marshall putting up a then career-high 29 points, 17 rebounds, and 2 assists on relatively inconsistent play, but 10 of 23 shooting. He had some gaps in this ball game. I can't even deny it. And then Brandon Williams became the first Mavs bench player to put up 25 points, 5 rebounds, and 5 assists off the bench since 2016 in 34 minutes of play, with 31 points, 6 assists, and 5 boards on 10 of 15 shooting. On March 9th, the Mavs would then face off against the Suns, where after a little while, the Suns were able to go on a 21-5 run that ultimately, for the most part, the Mavericks overcame, and at the halfway mark, it was a 6-point ball game. So they were in it completely. But time and again, you had inconsistent Najee Marshall plays that kind of fucked up the momentum, to where the Suns were able to briefly take back full control before the Mavericks displayed their last signs of life in a game that they would lose by 9. Yet again, you had Naji Marshall put up a then career high of 34 points with a damn near triple-double in 9 rebounds and 10 assists on 13 of 22 shooting. Klay Thompson also had 26 points and 5 rebounds. In a perfect world, with that contribution and with other players being healthy, Mavericks probably would have won this game. But in a game that was stripped of all of its luster way before the action even started, the Suns were able to take it. Just fucking crazy. They would split the back-to-back series against the Spurs, winning the first one by 4, with Spencer Dinwiddie putting up 28 points in leading them to victory here before losing the next one. Klay Thompson would have 26 points as well, starting the game on 8 of 14 shooting. Naji Marshall had 23, and Kessler Edwards, despite not typically being a scorer, he managed to activate some element of that in this one, putting up 22 points and 11 rebounds on 9 of 12 shooting. Max Christie struggled, but they ultimately ended up overcoming that, shooting 53.4% from the field and 90% from the stripe. That is wild. They lost the next one by 10. Then they proceeded to get blown out by 37 points against the Rockets. And then, despite P.J. Washington Jr. putting up 29 points and 12 rebounds in this ball game on 11 of 17 shooting, despite Klay Thompson and Naji Marshall putting up 21 points and Max Christie having a better performance with 75% shooting from the field and 66% from deep with 18 points, they still managed to lose to the fucking dumpster fire Mavericks. Well, 76ers. By 5. With the shit show that they've been this season and as depleted as they are, they still managed to get the edge. It just shows where exactly the Mavericks are right now. Somehow, despite this horrible period of time, they are still in the play-in, but they are barely clinging to life. They have got to step it up. It's hard when your front office is led by stupid people, and then you're suffering all of these other injuries left and right. I mean, not only did Kai Jones get hurt, but they also lost one of their death pieces in Olivier Maxence Prosper. Like, everybody is going down. And it's not like these are minor injuries. Some of them are severe enough to knock different players out for extended periods of time. And it seems like they just can't recover from that. I don't know, man. It's so bad. Now, moving on to the Nuggets. And let's just say that they have had a roller coaster of a time, okay? In some of these games, they've produced history-making moments. And other times have just been head-scratching. Losses, head-scratching decision-making. I mean, they have been, over this time, 4-3. Like, it's crazy, man. They would start out with a 6-point victory against the Kings, in which Westbrook put up 25 and Jokic added 15 boards of his own. They would also have Michael Porter Jr. put up a 13-point and 12-rebound double-double. Christian Braun also added 15 as a starter. They shot well from the field. They could have done better from deep, but they did get the slight advantage there. And then at the free throw line, obviously with them being a larger team than the Kings were at this point of time, it wasn't hard to bait those guys into fouls at all. The next game, in a hell of a match against the Suns. Oh boy. Whoo, man. This game right here was simply great. I don't know what else to say about it. It was exceptional. I mean, oh my gosh. Jokic had a great start to the game, putting up 10 points, 5 rebounds, and 5 assists in the first quarter alone, which really just set the stage for what he was bound to do over the course of this ballgame. Gordon would also have 12 first quarter points in this one. Now, the Suns, despite those efforts, and despite the Nuggets actually taking a 20-point lead at some point in the third quarter, make that 21. The Suns, credit to them, and I'll get deeper into it, but they stormed their way back in it. And eventually, with the help of guys like Colin Gillespie, Devin Booker, and ultimately Kevin Durant, they ended up tying the game in regulation. Nikola Jokic, to add to his night, assisted on what could have been the game-sealing shot by none other than Christian Braun with just a second left. But ultimately, the Suns had a timeout at the end of the ball game. They were able to inbound the ball on an exceptional play to an open Kevin Durant in the corner. He tied it up, and the game was sent to overtime, where both teams would just put on an offensive masterclass. And with the sheer rate of which the Nuggets were running their offense, it just became too much for the Suns, who would then be down by 11 points with 50 seconds left to go in the ball game after multiple Christian Braun buckets. Not only up to this point did Jokic record his 7th game in this single season with 15 points, 15 rebounds, and 15 assists, but also with an additional Michael Porter Jr. bucket before those successive Braun dunks and layups. He would notch his 20th assist, becoming the first ever player in NBA history to put up at least 30 points, 20 assists, and 20 rebounds in a ball game. He also recorded a career high in assists with 22. Ultimately, with an effort like that, yes, it was aided in some part by Kevin Durant's heroics. But the Nuggets would win by 8 in a fucking shootout. 31 points, 21 boards, and 22 assists for Jokic. 13 of 22 shooting. I keep saying it. You don't see too many players put up this type of stat line. You don't see players doing this consistently. And here you have a player who is branded as unathletic and not truly dominant in the physical sense, being able to do that kind of damage to a team. Like, he is literally putting up Wilt-like statistics in ways that are seemingly unorthodox to fans who pride themselves on preferring athleticism and physical dominance. For Jokic, there is some physical dominance there. I mean, he is 6'11", 284. It's not muscle, but you're not going to win a matchup against him if he backs you down in the post. This is really an IQ thing. There may not be a smarter player in the league right now than Nikola Jokic. I don't think that is a rash statement to say at all. The way as everything is unfolding, I'm watching this live too, and man, I was ecstatic to see that play out in real time. It was great, man. It just, to see how easy it looked out there for this man to essentially just move defenders out of the way with his eyes, or just disregard them completely, despite being in a particular zone that he was trying to attack. The level of combined arm strength, angles, and overall passing still allowed him to fit some very tight passes into some very tight windows and thread the needle so effectively too. It's not even like he was just being reckless. He had just 4 turnovers in this ball game. And again, still, I gotta bring this up every time, he still does not have a game with 10 or more turnovers since November 3rd of 2022. Still. And honestly, at this rate, if you can have a player put up that kind of stat line and keep turnovers to a minimum like that, I do not see that changing anytime soon. In a day where a lot of players who are ball dominant have games where they do tread very closely to that 10 turnover mark, and some actually get there. Some do still triumph in victory, and others lose. Jokic doesn't even have to have that problem. It is insane. And when you have a player who can affect an offense in such a dynamic way like that, everyone else eats. Every single player who stepped on the court in the game shot over 50% from the field. Zeke Naji was the only player for the Nuggets in this game that did not put up double digits. And that is simply because he played just 13 minutes. Peyton Watson with 11. Russell Westbrook with 14. Michael Porter Jr. with 16. Jamal Murray with 19 and 8 assists. And Christian Braun with 25 and 5 assists. Aaron Gordon also pitching in 27 with 7 threes. I can say that the Nuggets were riding high off of that performance as they traveled to Oklahoma to take on OKC on March 9th. And they kept that game as competitive as possible up until the fourth quarter. Not only did they, in this fourth quarter, allow Thunder to put up 41 points, but they allowed over the course of a good portion of that time, a 33-14 run, and lost by 24, while giving up 127 points to this squad. It didn't help that they didn't make their free throws, but at the end of the day, that run literally lost them the game. Anytime you can allow a team, a collective unit, to go on a tear like that against you, it's going to be a wrap. Now, that's despite Jokic and Michael Porter Jr. putting up concurrent 24-point double-doubles, along with Nikola Jokic getting almost another triple-double. 10 of 23 shooting for him and 10 of 19 shooting for Michael Porter Jr. Christian Braun had 19 points and Jamal Murray had 17. With that being said, they would get the win in the back-to-back against the Thunder in Oklahoma City again, with them winning by 13 this time, still giving up 127 points. Nikola Jokic having another near triple-double with 35 points, 18 rebounds, and 8 assists on 15 of 20 shooting. Jamal Murray adding 34 points and 6 assists on 11 of 22 shooting. And Michael Porter Jr. adding 17 points of his own. Peyton Watson missed just one shot from the field and had 16. And Russell Westbrook also had 16. Just craziness, man. You would think, though, if you're going to continue to play that kind of defense against these teams, ultimately, you will be done in. That is exactly what happened on March 12th. They would lose by 20 while giving up 115 points. Despite Jokic putting up 34 points and 8 rebounds in this game that I watched on 13 of 23 shooting, it wasn't even close. It was not close. They absolutely cratered. Like, in the first half alone, the Timberwolves had somewhere around 16 points off of turnovers. Jamal Murray had like a single point in the first half or something like that. It was just a complete and total struggle for them. It literally went like the last playoff series that they had against each other last year, between the Nuggets and Timberwolves in the second round. The way how that series closed out in Denver, despite Jokic putting up his best efforts and Murray, at least around that time, doing the same thing, they still got their asses kicked in that Game 7. To have a repeat of that now seems a bit interesting to me. And that streak would continue. Note that in every single game I've mentioned so far for the Nuggets, they have allowed at least 115 points. In all except the Kings game, which was a problem. And again, while they thrived in some cases, like this game on March 14th, where they managed to beat the Lakers by 5 despite putting up allowing 126 points, they got lucky in this one with the fact that multiple players in Braun, Murray, and Jokic had at least 20 points. And most other players shot well enough to the point where they were able to get a 51.8% clip from the field and a 41.9% clip from deep. They were also exceptional at the free throw line, hitting 78.9% of their free throws while making 30 of them on 38 attempts. They won the battle in the transition, and they held their own weight for just enough to keep the Lakers at bay. The same could not be said for this matchup on March 15th against the Wizards. And man, this is the most egregious one of them all. It marked the second time this season against the Wizards that Nikola Jokic had at least a 40-point double-double, along with a near triple-double, 40 points, 13 rebounds, and 9 assists for him on 16 of 30 shooting. He has been a Wizards killer. Everybody has their way against the Wizards anyway, but he has been an exceptional player against them. And for a while, Denver had the advantage. They were able to tie up the ball game late as well. Do not know how the Wizards of all teams were keeping this a competitive matchup, but Jamal Murray did hit the game-tying shot. You want to know what happens right after that? Jordan Poole is able to pull up from deep despite having a game in which he struggled for the most part. He pulled up from deep and called game. Wizards win by 3. Despite the Nuggets having a bit of an advantage in keeping things relatively close in every single metric. That kind of goal gave a team like that the victory over a well-established roster. The Wizards pulled off a season sweep of the Nuggets in the craziest fashion imaginable. This was their complete downfall and a horrible way to end off this stretch. And they would still be third in the Western Conference, and to be honest, when I get into the next segment, they would turn things right back around. We'll see how long that lasts. But yeah, that's horrible. It was. Like, there's no... I can't put it any other way for you. It's just not acceptable. It is not. Moving on to the Pistons, who over the stretch went 3-4. They opened up with a 28-point victory against the Jazz because, of course, they then lost back-to-back games against the Clippers on March 5th, and then the Warriors by 5 on March 8th. And, I mean, we'll be getting to the Warriors in a second anyways. But let's just say, despite Clay Cunningham's best efforts, a very solid game for him. There was just one guy on the other side that was too formidable for them to account for late. They would win on the second night of their back-to-back after that loss, and then string together another win against the Wizards on March 11th by 20, before then losing to the Wizards by 4, despite Cade Cunningham on this March 13th matchup putting up 38 points and 10 assists on 9 of 25 shooting. But he did make 20 of 21 free throws. But he didn't hit a single 3 on 7 attempts. Do with that what you will. Pistons definitely needed better shooting, though. Just 10 of 30, pretty generic. And if you're going to allow the Wizards to do what they did to you, why the hell are the Wizards doing this in the first place anyways? We'll get to them in the long run. Now you want to go ahead and start fucking winning ball games. I'll save that for later. It's actually dumb. It's stupid. They did have a great advantage in transition, in points off of turnovers, and in the paint. But that shooting, it is key in the modern age, if you didn't already know. They would then lose to the Thunder by 6. Anytime Tobias Harris is your leading scorer, especially in the year of 2025, you're gonna lose. You're gonna fucking lose. While I didn't see it unravel necessarily, apparently during this time, the Pistons were called for 5 different technicals in the third quarter alone. With Cade Cunningham, he already had a rough game leading up to this stretch with just 11 points on 5 of 18 shooting, but he was ejected from the game. And JB Bickerstaff was not a fan of it at all. I can't blame him. But, yeah. Certainly rough. Just a tough loss there. They're still all right. I mean, they're 6th in the Eastern Conference. They're just above the play-in. And honestly, with the fucking way that things look, like the Hawks are honestly feeling more pressure right now than the Pistons are. The Pistons have had such a great season to the point where for one of the first times in a long time, they aren't the team that has to play catch up to really anybody. They're just trying to maintain. As long as they do that, they're good. I mean, just keep on playing winning basketball. This is literally the first time they've done it in years. You've got to be excited for that if you're a Pistons fan. In all honesty, no matter how much I can try and joke about it, like that's tremendous. You gotta love that. Seriously. I have nothing bad to say about that at all. Surely great work. Moving on to the Dubs, and up from March 3rd to March 15th, they went undefeated, winning all 7 of their ball games and extending their exceptional record as a team, with Jimmy Butler III in the lineup, getting to, I believe, 13 in 1 with him in the lineup, aside from the shitty-ass 76ers game that I mentioned in the last video. They won by 18 against the Hornets, as I mentioned, with Stephen Curry having a bit of homecoming, and Buddy Hield leading the way in spite of all that, putting up 22 points of his own. Draymond also had 12 rebounds, and Brandon Podziemski even added 19 points and 11 rebounds in this one on 6 of 16 shooting. In the next matchup, in a game that I watched, they took on the Knicks in New York, in the Garden, in the back-to-back. Coming into it, we already know that Stephen Curry has been a very great player in Madison Square Garden, and especially against the Knicks. Curry would have 14 third-quarter points before an 8-0 Knicks run made things a little closer end off the third, and then the Warriors were able to go on a 20-9 run in the fourth quarter to win the ball game. Curry would finish with 28 on 10 of 21 shooting and 5 threes, while Buddy Hield had 15 off the bench. Jimmy Butler III and Brandon Podziemski had 19 points on relatively good efficiency in a 12-point victory, which saw them be more efficient from the field in most cases. And they were able to get out in transition pretty effectively, which ended up making all the difference in this ballgame. Then, in the next matchup, they would take on the Nets in a matchup where Stephen Curry, though it wasn't nationally televised, that man hit a fucking post-fade 3-point jumper from damn near half court to end off the first half, after being down by 22 against the Nets. The Warriors would win this ball game by 2. There was a cause for concern. 1, because you shouldn't have to do that against the Brooklyn Nets. But it did make history, as they would be the only team this season to have that many comeback victories after being down by 20 points. No other team has done that this much this season. Curry in this one would have 40 points on 12-20 shooting and 7 threes. Jimmy Butler added 25 points on 10 of 13 shooting and also hit one of the first 3-point jumpers he has made since the trade. Moses Moody had 10 in a starting role, and Gary Payton II added 16 points off the bench. Now, Gary Payton II's contributions would be well documented in just a few games to come, but first they did handle business against the Pistons by 5, as I just mentioned, with Stephen Curry putting up 32, but Draymond Green hitting the game-sealing three-point shot. Of all people. Then, on March 10th, they would face off against the Blazers, and even though Danny Avdija put forth his best foot in a pretty dominant game by him, I'll get into the full stats for him when I talk about the Blazers. But this was a great team effort here, led by none other than Gary Payton II, who, off the bench, led everyone in scoring for the Warriors with 26 points on 11 of 16 shooting and 4 threes. Stephen Curry had 24 points with 5 threes as he was inching closer to the 4,000 mark. Buddy Hield had 20 points on 7 of 10 shooting, along with Moses Moody. And Jimmy Butler III had 15, while Quentin Post had 11. Very proficient shooting yet again, as they had 53%, 51.2% from deep, and 90.5% from the stripe shooting splits overall. Won in pretty much every other significant category also. Then on this night, March 13th, in a game that I watched between the Dubs and the Kings, let's just say that it took a little while. The Kings were so fucking thirsty and desperate to prevent Stephen Curry from getting the 4,000 point record set against them. They were so desperate. They were intent the entire night on having, when they had their starters in, Keegan Murray covering him and just sticking with him completely, hand checking him, making sure that he doesn't get enough separation to load up a shot. And then when the bench unit came in comes Keon Ellis with his long fucking wingspan and his elite lateral quickness, all to shadow Stephen Curry and make sure that he doesn't get open. It's no disrespect to Keon Ellis. I love the fact that he plays such great defense. But damn, bruh. Even I recognize what's going on here. Like, those were the only two that stuck with Stephen Curry for the most part of that night. And even when he was able to make things happen, he had a relatively quiet night. But the very few times that Ellis and Murray were late on their rotations or distracted enough to focus their attention elsewhere and have Curry get open so he could shake off other inferior defenders, he was able to hoist up a couple of three-pointers and eventually get the mark in the third quarter. They had a tribute video during the timeout. They did not have a standing ovation, and they were intent on it, as the broadcast team stated, which is definitely fair. Still, on a night that was about Stephen Curry to some extent, with him being relatively quiet, the team as a whole got involved. The Kings wanted to make sure that they weren't beaten by Stephen Curry, that somebody else, anybody else at that point, would step up on the Warriors side and beat the Kings down. And that's exactly what happened. Nine different players eight different players put up double digits on the night. Guy Santos hit all of his shots. Quentin Post hit 3 threes for 10 points. Gary Payton II matched Curry's total with 11. Buddy Hield had 16 points. Moses Moody had 17 points. And for the first time after 31 straight games missed due to injury, Jonathan Kuminga returned and provided 18 points off the bench in 20 minutes of play, along with 3 rebounds. Draymond Green also led the show and got the action started as he hit back-to-back three-pointers in the corner and kept that momentum going for a game in which he led the Dubs in scoring with 23 points on 8 of 14 shooting and 4 threes on the night. Another proficient game from the field in terms of efficiency. They won beyond the arc, and they won in the paint. Easy 26-point victory. This next game that I watched on Saturday, March 15th, against the Knicks, yet again, would not be as easy. The Warriors would create a little bit of distance. I mean, of course, you have a man in Stephen Curry who, up to that point, had averaged 4.9 made three-pointers per match against New York, which was the most for any player against any team all time. That stayed the same way. Jimmy Butler, to start that off, hit a buzzer beater at the end of the first quarter off the glass, ironically enough. The Warriors did have a lead at the end of the first half. But in a relatively low-scoring game, you could imagine that both defenses locked up intently at multiple points in the game. No one was able to create much separation at all. Still, despite the Knicks' best efforts after a 12-point third quarter from Stephen Curry, the Warriors would eventually have to go on a very short but important run to ultimately win the ball game, helped by Draymond, yet again in this stretch, clutching up with a late game bucket. And then Steph Curry, despite missing a free throw in a very rare instance, hitting the other one to ultimately give them the edge. Curry had another 28-point outing in this one, with 4 threes made, and Moses Moody had 18 points as well. All in all, a spirited run that had placed them as the 6th seed in the Western Conference. We'll see how they can manage to protect that. The Warriors would have a few developments in this time. Some positive and some rather interesting. I had this one carry over from the last video, but Jimmy Butler was apparently sued by some group in Miami. It probably has something to do with housing, because in it they cited unpaid rent and damages to property in this specific document for legal action. Now, I am trying to look and see this now, but to this point, I have not seen any update on what that looks like right now. I mean, okay, overstaying Miami lease, damaging property. This is probably a matter that's being handled privately, because the last report are coming in from a couple weeks back, and they're really just breaking down the details of this action. I don't, they haven't had any update on any results and things like that. But you would hope that that gets handled. You definitely don't want that carrying over for an extended period of time. Maybe they amicably settle this situation in time and then some news will break, but I'm not sure. A little later on, news would come out that Stephen Curry would take on an organizational role as a general manager of the Davidson men's college basketball team. He became the first active player to take on an organizational role with any college. Makes sense that you do this with your alma mater. We know that Adrian Wojnarowski did the same thing by going to St. Bonaventure's after retiring as an insider. So I definitely can respect that. Well understood on my end. Moving on to the Rockets, who during this stretch of time, they suffered back-to-back losses to open up, but overall, they went 6-2. The Thunder are always a tough matchup for any team, and they would lose that one by 9 points, despite Cameron Whitmore putting up 27 points and 11 rebounds in the first game that he's appeared in quite a long time. Like I said with the Rockets, that kind of small forward talent is a great problem to have, honestly. Any one of those guys can emerge as solid role players and even elite assets at some point of time. So they're in a good spot there. They then lost to the Pacers by 13. Alperen Sengun would have 25 points and 7 assists in this one. Still, Pacers were able to just do away with all of that. Even with Tyrese putting up 16 points and 14 rebounds off the bench. The fact of the matter is that they could not get efficient shooting from either Jalen Green or Dillon Brooks in this one, which eventually cost them. Also, 9 of 30 shooting from deep and just 50% from the line. Ironically enough, missing 13 free throws. Now, you're not going to make all 13, obviously. But damn, you would have made things closer. And if a few other things go in your favor, who knows? But you've got to do a better job of spacing the floor at that point. That being said, on the 5 or 6 game winning streak since then, they have won They've won 4 of these games by double digits, including back-to-back victories against the Pels by 12 and then by 29. They also beat the Magic by 13 with Jabari Smith notching 20 points in this one. Steven Adams also had a pretty solid throwback game on his end, getting 17 rebounds. It has been a long time since I've seen that. 11-point double-double as well. 11 of those rebounds were offensive rebounds. And certainly in a game that was as low scoring as this one, with them winning it with a score of 97-84, it was a slugfest indeed. But you can have a defense that holds a team to 32.6% shooting and 25% from deep in Orlando's case. Combined with that effort on the offensive glass, oh yeah. you can see exactly why they got the victory here. And in relatively convincing fashion. They then beat the Suns by 7 with Jalen Green putting up 29. As I mentioned, they won convincingly against the Mavericks by 37 on March 14th, with Tari Eason putting up what I believe is a career high for him, 30 points, starting on 11 of 15 shooting, and 2 threes. Jalen Green had 23, and Alperen Sengun had 16 and 15 on 7 of 16 shooting. Aaron Holiday also pitched in 13 points, just for the hell of it, I guess. They would then take on the Bulls and win by 3, as I mentioned, on March 15th in the back-to-back, with Jalen Green leading the way this time with 28 points and 6 rebounds of his own on 11 of 25 shooting. Alperen Sengun added 24 points and 15 rebounds on 9 of 18 shooting. And Fred VanVleet came back and put up 23 points. If Amen Thompson would have played in this game, would have answered my question pertaining to what exactly they would do with him when their roster was fully healthy. But indeed, he was injured for this one. And, I guess we've still got to wait it out and see exactly how that will look. Because Jabari Smith Jr. got the start, I would assume, in place of Amen Thompson in this situation. But there's no way for me to really gauge that until we get a glimpse of that first. They are the second seed in the Western Conference after this stretch. So, they had a rough period of time after the All-Star break, but they're back on straight as far as their particular path goes. Moving on to the Pacers, who over this stretch of time have gone 3-4. Now, over the course of this time, they did start out with the aforementioned 13-point victory against the Rockets, in which Tyrese Haliburton put up 28 points, 15 assists, and 3 rebounds with just 2 turnovers on 9 of 16 shooting, along with 5 made threes. Pascal Siakam had 18 points and 2 rebounds, which seems like a relatively small amount. I'm not going to lie. That is shocking. Aaron Nesmith also added 16 points. You compare what the Rockets did in that ball game with the fact that the Pacers shot 50, 40, and 100 splits. Even with them getting killed on the glass, that didn't matter at all. In every other way, they had the advantage. In every other capacity. At that point, there was no stopping them. They would then proceed to lose a streak, or go on a 3-game losing streak, allowing at least 120 points in every single one of them, and losing the back-to-back against the Hawks in Atlanta, and then the Bulls in Chicago by 18, as I mentioned. Very bad streak right there. Now, granted, with Miles Turner being a part of this ball game in terms of leading the way, and also with them showcasing Johnny Furphy of all people, they were not fully healthy in this one. You have Tyrese Haliburton sitting this game out, and I would presume missing some combination of the past two. That's certainly huge. But Tyrese Haliburton would come back in return in a huge way on March 11th against the Pacers. Now, I will state that I did not watch all of this game. I did see majority of it, but not all. And man, I should have been in there for every single fucking second. It was a relatively contested first half. But the Pacers did have the slight advantage heading into the second half. The Bucks would come out swinging, though. And from then on, it was just back and forth to where the game was tied at the end of the third before a just complete and total display of strength on strength would take place throughout most of this fourth quarter. Ultimately, you would have Gary Trent Jr. make the three-point jumper to give the Bucks the advantage with a minute left. And then you would have Damian Lillard get the ball and hit a couple of free throws to give them the three-point lead with just 3 seconds left. Where from then on, you had the Pacers essentially run a football play that I saw in post. And despite struggling for most of the game, which makes sense, Tyrese Haliburton gets the ball, sprints over to the corner, and chucks up a three-point shot over Giannis Antetokounmpo and makes it while drawing the foul and then hitting the free throw to pull off a game-winning 4-point play late. He would finish with 14 points, 10 assists, and just a single turnover. Definitely not the greatest of displays. But when they needed a shot from him, he answered the call. You can't deny that. Pascal Siakam led the way in truth. He would have 25 points on 10 of 15 shooting, along with 12 rebounds and 5 assists this time, which is much better and a lot more representative of what I expect from Pascal Siakam, to be completely honest. Bennedict Mathurin also had 17 off the bench on 5 of 12 shooting as well. I mean, you can't have a much better ending to a ball game than that. Despite them being dominated in most other statistics, they did keep turnovers to a minimum, and they definitely got more opportunities on the offensive side of the ball from great defense, along with excellent transition effectiveness. The game realistically should not have been that close. Again, that's just a sign of potential slippage from the Pacers defense. But anytime you can win a game that close and still have a 31-3 advantage in the fast break, that's astonishing to me. I'm not going to lie. They would then get another victory to make it a back-to-back affair, with the 76ers winning it by 12. Relatively easy for them. Once more, they would have Haliburton put up another 14-point, 10-assist performance on 5 of 13 shooting this time, with yet again having just a single turnover. Even then, other players around him were certainly doing their jobs in terms of converting these opportunities and scoring at will after the setups from these particular passes. Pascal Siakam would lead the way with 27 points on 12 of 20 shooting. Haliburton is still on this tear. Like, for a time, he had 75 assists across 6 games with just 7 turnovers. I can assure you that with the last few that I just looked at, that he's actually played in, that assist to turnover ratio over this stretch of time remains 10-1, or near it, which is just absurd for any ball-dominant player in today's day and age. You have to appreciate that. And it would culminate in this game right here. Now, yes, they did lose in a matter of revenge for the Bucks, ironically enough. You'd figure they'd want to get back after suffering defeat like that. But okay, man. Despite them losing by 7, they had a strong offensive outing. Aaron Nesmith had 30 points on 11 of 16 shooting. Pascal Siakam had 26 points on 12 of 22 shooting. And yet again, another proficient game from this man. A season in which earlier on, they were calling him washed and shit. There's a very real case that he was probably still dealing with a combination of lingering injuries from the playoff series. And the fact that despite him being injured during that playoff series against the Celtics, he managed to play in the Olympics still. At least in a few matches. And also the fact that spending most of the time on the bench when he wasn't playing may have decreased his morale and confidence just a little bit. A variety of things could have taken place in the beginning of the season. There's no doubt about it. And he was certainly not playing well at all. Not denying that. But whatever the issue was, it has quite literally been resolved and flipped on its head. In this game, Tyrese Haliburton shot 9 of 16 from the field, along with putting up 24 points, grabbing 6 rebounds, dishing out 15 assists, grabbing 5 steals, all with just 1 foul in the ballgame, and with 0 turnovers. None. So yeah, somewhere in the ballpark of a 10-1 assist to turnover ratio in every single game that here's appeared in over now the last month or so, damn near. He's so fucking back. He's so back. I don't care what the hell people have to say about it. He is fucking back. And if you have this going on at this time, the Pacers are sitting pretty as the 5th seed in the conference. They don't have much room for error. I mean, the Pistons are right behind them, but they should still be well established as a playoff team, a true playoff team. You have this going on now. Oh boy, they could be in for something this particular postseason. That's all I gotta say about that. You gotta respect it, man. Moving on to the Clippers. Okay, over this stretch of time, they went 6-2 also, which is pretty damn good. But I am going to really quickly tie in the Lakers and the Clippers for this particular portion of this segment. I'm going to talk about the Lakers next anyways. But, man, this needs to be said right now. On March 4th, the Suns played the Clippers. I watched this game live. And watched majority of it, too. The Suns started out as bad as you probably could. It wasn't looking pretty for them earlier on in the first quarter. At all. Their defense remained porous. We already knew what time it was with that. Like, no. We knew what it was. Okay? They did start to make a little bit of a run, going on a 17-5 stretch to close out the first quarter, and then briefly open up the second. But some craziness happened as this is going on. To start out, the man on the call, the play-by-play guy, and Brian Anderson, took it upon himself in a game involving the Suns and the Clippers to allude to LeBron James. This man goes out and says on national television, I wonder if LeBron is somewhere thinking about me tonight. What? What the fuck does that have to do with the basketball game? This is when I came back in as well. I was beside myself. I could not believe that I heard that on national television in a game that didn't even relate to the man. You find a way to bring him up. It's ridiculous. And it's just, I took it as disrespect to those markets. People from the Suns fan base and the Clippers fan base are there to watch those respective teams. They don't need to hear about that man every second of the fucking broadcast. We get that he's one of the most accomplished players in the league. But like, damn, the overexposure to a point gets annoying. Especially when you recognize that overexposure leads to just a decrease in coverage on some of the more compelling and more pressing stories out there in the NBA to pay attention to. Some of the more truly relevant developments to what the fuck is actually going on in the moment. It takes away from that. And at that point, that is sabotage. But you have so many analysts and broadcasters doing it. I mean, there are obviously some at TNT. You know, there are obviously some at ESPN. Every network's got a rotating lineup of people who just do everything in their power to protect LeBron James. Praise the hell out of him, even when it's uncalled for. And then even in situations where there's no defending him, no need to stick up for him, they will do it anyway at the expense of somebody else. And it's ridiculous. And then it would get worse from that. Because I get back in as they start up the second quarter. And on the same night, you have LeBron James en route to reaching 50,000 career points in the NBA in the playoffs and regular season combined. I kid you not, what TNT does next absolutely pissed me the fuck off in that moment. For the next 6 minutes of game time and however many minutes of real time, they had the TNT broadcast of the Suns and Clippers game to the left side of the fucking screen. And then they had the Lakers and Pelicans broadcast on the right side of the screen for a split screen view on national television, all just to show LeBron reaching the milestone. And they tracked it all throughout as if they were literally waiting for this man to score the 50,000th point. Scoping out the thing. Did nobody get the fucking memo? This game has nothing to do with him. This is not about him in this moment. And you have grown-ass men behind the scenes pulling this up like the general masses want to fucking watch a side-by-side view in this moment. Minutes on end of game time in both matches pass before LeBron even takes a fucking shot. Everyone else for the Lakers is scoring at this point, and they are intent on keeping the broadcast on until he does it. The broadcasters on the main call aren't even completely into the fucking matchup in front of them because you're trying to monitor two games at one fucking time. It's stupid as shit. And then he does finally do it, which at that point, the moment's fucking soil. Like, all credit to him for reaching the milestone. But the fact that they went out of their way to take away from the markets of Phoenix and LA in that moment of time, just so they could put all of their attention on this fucking guy. Like I said, it's fucking sabotage, and they wonder why no one wants to tune in to the live fucking broadcast of these games. You wonder why ratings are down for the league as a whole now. Who wants to see that? Who wants to watch that for any player? A lot of these fans are there for their respective teams. Some of the other storylines are fucking cool, but they do not become so blatant in their pursuit of focusing on the alternative storyline that they sabotage their goddamn broadcast like that. The NCAA had action going on at the same time with college basketball. And what did they do on ESPN? They covered it after the fact. They waited until the action was at a pause during the halftime report to allude to it for just a quick second, and then they moved the fuck on. Because they at least recognize that you are getting in the way of amateur athletes performing on some of the biggest fucking stages of their fucking lives if you let it be known that you're trying to broadcast that moment along with that action in real time concurrently. They recognize how that shit would have looked, and they decided to do it afterwards. I guess TNT just did not give a fuck, and that's why they are losing the rights to the fucking NBA right now. It's going to be their final season having it for what could potentially be forever. Maybe they just do not care. And at that point, you're doing a disservice to your audience. How the fuck are you not going to give a fuck about that? Because now you're fucking with pro athletes and their exposure. Some of these players do not even get opportunities to play on national television like that. And all for the sake of one fucking man. You're going to put that all on the line and cast their exposure to the side like that? It's fucking sabotage. Nobody wants to tune into that shit at that point. It is just asinine. Not only did it soil that moment, but it soiled the rest of the game even. Because this game actually ended up being truly competitive. The Suns would go down yet again after allowing a 41-point second quarter. And then they eventually went on a 44-22 run to pick up the victory, notching their 9th comeback win on the season after being down by 10 or more points, as the Clippers would lose their 11th game after leading by more than 10. They actually played well down the stretch, all aided by a guy in Colin Gillespie, who was a former bench player for the Nuggets, who was there when they won the NBA championship in 2023. He had a tear late in that ball game and put up 10 points in 15 minutes. But that couldn't be the main storyline of that fucking particular matchup, because it had to relate to a completely different player in a completely different market at a completely different fucking period of time in the damn ball game. Just absolutely atrocious work. Like, that is so just horrible. Horrible, bro. Horrible. Like, you wonder why ratings are down. Who would realistically want to watch that? Unless you are just completely on LeBron's jock. Who would want to see that, man? All credit to him, but you could have handled that in a completely different way. You could have let it go to a fucking game break like the NFL will do. You will have them for a split second of time alert you that they are going to a game break to check in on a particular play or development in another game. And after it, they will cut away. And then the broadcast team, with the play-by-play guy or the color commentator, they'll step in and add in a little tidbit after the fact, and then they'll move on. TNT didn't even offer anyone a fucking warning that they were going to do this. They just straight up fucking do it without regard for the audience, without regard for the fucking players on the court playing the goddamn game. The Suns would then rip off a 3-game winning streak, beating the Pistons by 8, beating the Knicks by 10 on March 7th, and then winning a close matchup against the Kings by 1, with James Harden in this one putting up 29 points and 11 assists, with 9 rebounds on 10 of 19 shooting. Tyrese Haliburton also had 22 points and 14 rebounds on the night, on 9 of 14 shooting, and Derrick Jones Jr. and Kawhi Leonard had 17 points each, with Kawhi Leonard, despite him struggling from the field on the night, he hit the game winner to cap it off in overtime. They had a brief obstacle with a 7-point loss to the Pelicans of all teams. They then bounced back for another 3-game winning streak to close out this stretch with victories of 15 against the Heat, 23 against the Hawks, as I mentioned, and then 35 against the Hornets, as I mentioned, with James Harden in this one on March 16th, putting up 31 points, 10 rebounds, and 7 assists on 9 of 15 shooting and 4 threes on the night. Kawhi Leonard also added 23, and Ivica Zubac also had 17 and 14. They shot great from the field. 48% from the field, 50% from deep, and 87% from the line. They also were able to control the glass completely. And again, as I stated, Clippers have a lot more talent to offer than the Hornets do right now. So they were just completely overmatched. Moving on to this goddamn team. In the game that LeBron did do it, they did win. Because if we're going to spend all this time talking about LeBron so much, how about the fact that in other games in which he has set history relating to fucking points before this one, he didn't win. He didn't win those games. And yet the coverage was still focused on the sheer fact that he got there without taking into account the fact that they did not fucking win. He reached that threshold against the fucking Thunder, and he did not win that game. They lost late in that ball game when he reached the 40,000 mark. But he broke Kareem's record. Nobody wants to talk about that. When he reached the 40,000 point threshold, they lost that fucking game. But nobody wants to talk about that. You're not going to bring that up if it hurts LeBron's reputation or fucking ego. You're not going to do it. And it's a fucking shame that you have people who are not willing to just stick to some form of true journalism without fucking bias in the damn sports industry. Anything to save face. Anyone who is affiliated with this man LeBron in some fashion will do anything to make sure that they save face for him. It is sad. The Lakers would then take on the Knicks on March 6th in a matchup that I watched most intently in the fourth quarter, where after the Lakers were down 90-80, they went on a spirited run throughout the rest of that period, with Gabe Vincent coming up clutch for them on multiple occasions and eventually hitting the shot that would force the Knicks to have to tie the ball game. But Jalen Brunson was a complete force to be reckoned with in that fourth quarter and overtime. They had trouble stopping him completely. And then ultimately, the Lakers, despite that, would come through with a 113-109 victory in which Luka Doncic had a 32-point, 12 assists, and 7 rebound outing on 9 of 23 shooting and hitting 10 free throws, while LeBron had 31, 12, and 8 on 11 of 23 shooting. Gabe Vincent had 4 threes in that period of time alone. Dalton Knecht had 11 points, and Jackson Hayes had 8. Austin Reeves struggled in this one, shooting just 2 of 13 from the field for 8 points. But ultimately, with those kinds of shots in the clutch, they were able to do just enough to win the ball game. Then after that, shit hit the fan. completely. They went 3-4 over the stretch, including a 1-4 record in time in which they did not have the man on the court, ironically enough. The Lakers-Celtics game saw LeBron come into the game averaging 28.7 points against the Celtics, which is the 6th most all-time for one person against any team. And the Lakers were riding an 8-game winning streak, their longest since 2019 and 20. But again, as I mentioned earlier, with the Celtics' ability to hound Luka Doncic earlier on and make life on that offensive side of the ball difficult for the team as a whole, the Celtics jumped out to a convincing lead before briefly losing it and coming closer and closer and closer to giving it up before LeBron suffered a groin injury that will keep him sidelined for 1 to 2 weeks. Now, at this point, he's probably just a few days or so away from returning, probably at the end of this particular week, but that's neither here nor there. In any case, he would end off the night with 22, 14, and 9 on 11 of 23 shooting. And Luka Doncic, despite the turnovers, still managed to drop 34 points and 8 rebounds on 11 of 22 shooting. In the next matchup, they would shockingly lose to the Nets, as I mentioned earlier. Once more, despite Luka Doncic getting 12 rebounds and 12 assists, he struggled shooting from the field in this particular ball game. Even with 22 points, he shot just 8 of 26 from the field. It was Gabe Vincent who led the way with 24 points and 3 assists on 8 of 12 shooting along with 6 threes. Austin Reeves yet again struggled, despite Dalton Knecht also pitching in 19 points. That just was not enough for them to overcome whatever it is the Nets pulled together in this one. It's just incredibly surprising. Still, I don't understand it. You can't possibly lose a game like that. They're currently sitting 4th in the Western Conference, and they're neck and neck, too. Games like that should be winnable. Then on this March 13th matchup against the Bucks, in a game that I watched for the most part, it just all went to shit. The Bucks were intent on doing the same thing, forcing Luka to make some errant decisions earlier on in the ballgame that created just a little bit of separation. Now, the Lakers were in it for the most part, but every time they would string together some form of positive play, it was just followed up by some of the most unimaginable shit. They get a few solid buckets on the offensive end, and then they give up multiple lobs to Jericho Sims prior to having to call a timeout. They get a few more great possessions on offense before getting into a situation where they manage to get down the court as the Bucks are trying to drive in transition, and they trap Giannis. They trap him. He loses the basketball. And as they are all converging on it, you have Jordan Goodwin in the mix, I believe. You had Dorian Finney-Smith down there. And you had Jared Vanderbilt down there. None of them get the ball. It rolls out to the fucking corner where where Kevin Porter Jr. waits for it to roll to him. He steps back, dribbles into it, takes a shot, hits an animation, and makes it. That was just the story of this ballgame. Really. And it hurts worse that Luka Doncic actually had a great performance overall. 45 points is the most that he's had with this team. He had 11 rebounds and 3 assists in this one on 14 of 27 shooting. It could have been more, but people just were not hitting a lot of shots in this one. Austin Reeves was doing well also with 28, 8, and 3 on 10 of 17 shooting with 4 threes of his own. If they wanted to try to maintain without LeBron, they were going to have to do a much better job than this. And yet, somehow, they still did not get the memo. This Lakers-Nuggets game here, yes, you didn't have Luka Doncic, but I mean, they had players step up, and Shake Milton with 16 off the bench as a sixth man. Dalton Connect, starting, had 32 points on 13 of 27 shooting and 5 threes. And Austin Reeves had 37 points, 8 rebounds, and 13 fucking assists on 13 of 26 shooting. You can't ask for much more than that from those three. But still, it's just some of the other guys, man. You yes, the Nuggets are ultimately stronger at this point. You can take solace in the fact that they fought hard for it, but man, it's just crazy that they continue to drop these games. It also didn't help that Alex Len is just a complete and total black hole and doesn't really provide much of anything for them. I mean, just 2 points in 12 minutes on his end. I don't think you can ever expect him to do anything, but it's like, damn, at this point, bro. I mean, come the fuck on. Seriously, man. I don't understand. What the hell is it gonna take? So yeah, a 2-4 stretch in this time. It is what it is. And then moving on to the Grizzlies here, where over the course of this time, as I mentioned earlier, they started out with yet another close defeat at the hands of the Hawks. But overall, they have been 5-3 in this stretch. They lost their next matchup against the Thunder by 17, which is a given. I mean, as pretty much the best team in the NBA for quite a while, you can imagine how difficult it would be for anyone to take them on. I mean, off the rip, the Grizzlies gave up a 10-4 run. They did kind of try to counter back with a few series of textbook play on their own. But ultimately, it was not enough. For a second there, the Thunder looked like they could have been had. Late in the ball game, they did get off to a slow start in the fourth quarter. But ultimately, the Thunder were able to go on a 16-6 run, and they never looked back from there. So the Grizzlies lost this one by 17. Is Shea did Shea things, which I'll obviously get to when I talk about them. As for the Thunder, off the bench, you had Brandon Clark put up a 13-point, 11-rebound double-double on 5 of 7 shooting. Ja Morant would go through a good amount of struggles over the stretch as well. 8 of 22 shooting for 24 points in this one. Certainly not the best outing for him. Even with that, they would shake back. Once more, Grizzlies in this game against the Mavericks, as I mentioned, did win by 11. Ja Morant did struggle from the field, but did hit a few clutch shots late, stringing together some quality possessions that ultimately gave them a commanding win and got him 31 points on the board with 8 assists on 13 of 29 shooting. Desmond Bane also added 27 points and 16 rebounds, along with 6 assists on 11 of 24 shooting. Brandon Clark yet again with another solid contribution off the bench of 17 points and 8 boards. They are definitely glad to have him back, by the way. They would win by 3 against the Pelicans in the middle of a 4-game winning streak. I don't know how it got that close, but Desmond Bane and Ja Morant would combine for 62 points, 14 assists, and 13 boards on a combined 24 of 46 shooting from the field. Scottie Pippen Jr. also had 12 points and 6 rebounds off the bench. Then they would knock off the Suns by 2 yet again. The score of 120 to 118 as Ja Morant put up 29 points and 12 assists on 9 of 13 shooting, along with 10 free throws. G. Jackson II also had 14. Cam Spencer had 16 off the bench. Lamar Stevens had 13 off the bench. Scottie Pippen Jr. had 13 off the bench. All on pretty good shooting from the field. And ultimately, that's what gave them the edge here. It helped that they had an advantage at the stripe as well. And they were able to win in transition and control possession of the ball with some additional turnovers on their end. They finally capped off that mini winning streak with one against the Jazz by 7, in which Luke Kennard led the way for them with 30 points off the bench and 4 rebounds on 11-14 shooting, along with 7 threes. Ja Morant with one of the better shooting splits of this time, 8 of 17 from the field, along with 4 threes on 7 attempts and 28 points, along with 7 assists in this one. Desmond Bane also added 17 points, 9 assists, and 5 boards on 6 of 14 shooting. Obviously, the Jazz are not a hard team to beat. I mean, the Grizzlies had them in every way you can think of from an efficiency standpoint. They didn't win on the glass, and that's because of one man, which I will get to in time. But they would then lose to the Cavs, as I mentioned earlier, despite, as I was watching this game, Ja Morant had a hell of a fucking night in this one. There's like that's pretty good work. 44 points for him in this ball game, along with 8 rebounds and 7 assists on 17 of 22 shooting. By far the best performance he's had so far. But it was all in vain. All of it. Oh wait, no, I don't even think this game was nationally televised. Might not have been. Yeah, no, I was thinking of the Grizzlies Cavs matchup from the last segment, or last video. Yeah, this wasn't even nationally televised. Nonetheless, it's a solid performance, but they would manage to get back with Jaren Jackson Jr. this time, leading the way for them in this matchup against the Heat that they won by 34 points. Ja Morant was out for this one, but Jaren Jackson Jr. had 31 points and 6 rebounds on 13 of 18 shooting, while Desmond Bane added 22 points, 10 rebounds, and 8 assists on 9 of 16 shooting. Brandon Clark and Zach Edey had 12 points, and Luke Kennard had 11. Moving on to the Heat, who have been 1-7 in this stretch. They won their very first game against the Wizards by 16 on March 3rd, and then have proceeded to lose 7 straight games, including the game against the Cavs I mentioned earlier in the video, where Bam Adebayo had 34 points, a season high for him, and 12 assists while making multiple threes on the night, and that still wasn't enough. They then lost another close match against the Timberwolves just a couple days later, then lost to the Bulls by 5, the Hornets by 3 as I mentioned, and the Clippers by 15. They also got completely trounced against the Celtics and the Grizzlies by 34. It's just horrible, man. I get that they are missing Jimmy Butler, and they haven't really been able to find any sort of chemistry even when he was there, but my goodness, bro. That is just absurd. Yet, despite a 7-game losing streak that, to just briefly spoil without specific context, is continuing to this point. They're still 10th in the Eastern Conference. But they're going to lose that stronghold very quickly if this continues for long enough. They literally have no margin for error. They've got to do better. It is that simple. Moving on to the Bucks, who have been 4-3 over this stretch of time. They won their first couple of matchups against the Hawks and Mavericks, as I mentioned, in games that Giannis dominated in, and Damian Lillard, of course, with them being the highest scoring duo in the league, also got his own, including a 34-point ball game in Dallas. They did lose to the Magic by 2, the Cavs by 12, and then that heartbreaking loss to the Pacers by 1 on March 11th to cap off a 3-game losing streak. They would pick things back up immediately with the win against the Lakers that I mentioned earlier on in the video, and they did get their revenge against the Pacers as Giannis just continues to notch double-double on double-double, like literally. Just stacking them up at this point. It is craziness, to say the least. It should be noted, too, that all of this is going on while Bobby Portis Jr. is in the middle of serving a 25-game suspension due to violating the anti-drug policy. Now, there was a little bit of light shined on it. He detailed that he was trying to recover from injury with a specific type of prescription, and apparently he wasn't aware of the fact that it contained the banned substance in question. If that's true, that's always tough, but I feel like a lot of people use that. So it's really hard to say right now. But they seem to be weathering the storm despite having that loss in the lineup. Moving on to the Timberwolves, who have gone 6-0 during this stretch. Honestly, for them, being in danger of being a play-in team, to go on a winning streak like that now is pretty good. In their case, though, they're going to need other teams to start dropping ball games for them to truly usurp anybody. Because if you have that going on and you still have other teams performing at a great standard as well at the same time, you're not going to make a lot of progress. So they're going to have to lean on a lot of outside factors to make this happen. But as far as them handling their own business, they started out by beating the 76ers by 14, with Naz Reid putting up 23 points on 9 of 18, shooting in 5 threes, and Nickeil Alexander-Walker getting 20 points off the bench on 8 of 11 shooting with 3 threes. They shot very well from the field, 56.8% overall, 45% from deep, and a 94.1% clip at the stripe. You can be that effective as a ball club, you certainly give yourself the odds to win. Especially when you hold the opposing team to just 28.1% shooting from the three-point arc while making 9 less in a 14-point ball game. They would then beat the Hornets by 15, as I mentioned, with Anthony Edwards leading the way. Then they got a very unorthodox win against the Heat. They won with a final score of 106-104, but it was really Michael Conley Jr. and Julius Randle who got things going in this ball game. Naz Reid, DiVincenzo, and Michael Conley all led the way with 15 points. Julius Randle also added 10 rebounds and 9 assists. Anthony Edwards had a 13-point, 13-rebound game, and Jaden McDaniels had 13 points and 6 rebounds. It's just very odd all around. That's great team effort, and defense had to be on full display in this ball game. They still shot great from the field, but not at the line, which made things a lot closer than it truly needed to be. But anytime you can clamp down that much and kind of answer the call on occasion, like, that will certainly show up by the end of it. It was certainly close all the way throughout. But with Anthony Edwards doing what he needed to do at the foul line when it mattered the most, they ended up winning. They beat the shit out of the Spurs by 17 on March 9th. And then, in a game I mentioned earlier, they beat the Nuggets by 20. They could not stop making three-pointers, and it killed the Nuggets. I mean, literally, the Nuggets themselves shot 23.3% from deep. And a lot of possessions saw them get into situations where they made errant decision on top of errant decision that ultimately bought the Timberwolves more opportunities to steal them away. So that's where the difference really comes up here. I mean, anytime you are a football team or a basketball team that can't space the floor, and you can't stop the opposing team from spacing the floor that effectively, 42.5% clip for the Timberwolves while making 10 more threes and 10 more attempts. How do you expect to be competitive in a ballgame that way? Doesn't make a lot of sense. Anthony Edwards had 29 points, 6 assists, and 4 rebounds on 10 of 22 shooting. Julius Randle even had a solid matchup, including a few solid possessions that he strung together as he was the ball handler, which really surprised me. But, hey, man. You know, I suppose, man. 25 points per him on 9 of 12 shooting. Jaden McDaniels added 16 of his own. And they had Rudy Gobert back with him getting an 11-point, 10-rebound double-double on 4 of 8 shooting. They knocked off the Magic by 7 as well to cap off this stretch of time. Again, you need all the momentum that you can get, but it's going to take much more than just their own actions in these games. Obviously, you have to play the games in front of you, but damn. If other teams are getting hot at the exact same time, it makes things much more difficult. Moving on to the Pelicans, who over this stretch of time have gone 1-6. They had 4 straight losses to open up this period. They lost to the Lakers by 21, as I mentioned, although Zion had a great performance. By himself, he put up 37 points and 6 assists on 17 of 23 shooting. Excellent performance for him. Trey Murphy III added 19, and Jordan Hawkins added 17. But again, just 26.5% shooting from deep on 34 attempts. No matter how hard you were able to dominate in the paint, you don't stand a chance if you aren't even going to shoot a league average percentage from outside. To lose that statistical matchup that terribly, man. Who then lose the back-to-back to the Rockets, as I mentioned, despite yet again Zion stringing together another solid performance, and Trey Murphy III also leading the way here with 26 points of his own on 9 of 15 shooting in the first matchup. And then in the second matchup, Zion Williamson had another 20-point performance on 10 of 19 shooting. They then lost to the Grizzlies, as I mentioned earlier on. In this Clippers match, they would get a win, 127-120, as I alluded to earlier on. Zion Williamson had 22 points and 12 assists, along with 10 rebounds for yet another triple-double After not having one in his career, he's notched 2 just in this late stretch of the season. And this one came on 8 of 13 shooting and a perfect 6 of 6 from the line. Bench players, 3 bench players in Karlo Matkovic, Jordan Hawkins, and Jose Alvarado all had double digits. Bruce Brown added 12 points of his own as a starter, and CJ McCollum had 23 points and 7 assists on 8 of 16 shooting and 5 threes. They then proceeded to lose their next 2 ball games against the Magic by 20 and then against the Spurs by 4 in a very close matchup where CJ McCollum honestly performed fine, but they had to put together a more spirited effort, generally speaking. You'll take it against a team like the Spurs, where they currently stand right now, but the Pelicans are just, no matter what push they make, it's not going to really do them any good now. You're just disappointed, really, if you're a Pelicans fan, because you wanted to see this kind of fight earlier on. But, these things do not always work out as intended. Moving on to the Knicks, and they've had a pretty interesting time during this stretch. They have gone 2 and 4 during this stretch of time. They lost their first 3 games. The first against the Warriors, as I mentioned, and then the next one against the Lakers. Now, as I mentioned in this particular game, Jalen Brunson went absolutely stupid. By at least the 2-minute mark in overtime or so, he had 39 points and 10 assists on 13 of 26 shooting. He wasn't necessarily shooting the 3-ball well, but he was getting his way in the paint. And at multiple times in the fourth quarter and overtime especially, he was just sticking it to the defense. Literally, on a play in the fourth quarter, he drove in and he hit what would eventually be an important shot to send them to overtime, or at least get them closer to tying up the ball game. He hits the damn floater over LeBron. He was just taking names and cashing every single check imaginable. Up until a later sequence in the game where he kind of collided with LeBron and Austin Reeves, and eventually in the midst of all that, through no direct contact, his ankle just got completely twisted and caught up as he tried to land. It ended up being so damn weird of an adjustment to where he would suffer an ankle sprain in that exact moment. He was taken out of the ball game and he would be ruled out for the next couple of weeks. Now again, similar case to the LeBron injury that I mentioned earlier on, where enough time's passed now to where he'll be making a return sooner rather than later, but it's still going to be a little bit for him. OG Anunoby also had 20 points, but again, it took a lot for him to get those 20 points. Because I don't know what it has been with both OG Anunoby and Miles Bridges in this one. You expect them both to be 3-and-D guys. Not necessarily the most adept at just straight up scoring the basketball and slashing to the rim, trying to drive and penetrate the core of the defense to get buckets. That's not what they do. Yet they were going to have to elevate their game if they wanted to weather this storm without Jalen Brunson. It would take a little bit for them, though, as they would lose to the Clippers by 10. They would then win 2 consecutive ball games, beating the Kings by 29 with a score of 133-104, in which Karl Anthony Towns had a 26-point outing and 9 rebounds on 8 of 15 shooting and 3 threes. OG Anunoby would have a better game, 3 threes and 24 points on 10 of 15 shooting. Miles McBride would be forced to enter the point guard position even though he's more of a shooting guard, and had 7 assists in this ball game as well, on 7 of 11 shooting with 21 points. Josh Hart would grab 6 rebounds and score 18 points on 6 of 11 shooting, and Mikal Bridges would notch 15 points on 6 of 10 shooting, and just a single 3. You can have a team shoot 53.6, 55, and 80.8. You can see why stuff got out of hand as quickly as it did over this stretch of time. This next game would not be so easy, even if they were facing off against the Trailblazers. The Trailblazers for a while had been on a heater, and I suppose that they've tailed off a little bit, including with this particular game here. The Knicks had to work hard for it, because I'm not going to lie, the Trailblazers for a little while there had them exactly where they wanted them. And yet, later on in this fourth quarter, you would have a back and forth bout between both teams prior to Scoot Henderson actually making the free throws necessary to get them into overtime, where it would just come down to the wire still. And then, at the end of the game, Mikal Bridges would end up getting the ball off the inbound and hitting what would be the game-winning shot to win with a score of 114 to 113. Mikal Bridges had 33 points on 13 of 21 shooting and 2 threes, including the game winner. OG Anunoby had 23 points and 7 rebounds on 8 of 20 shooting. Kind of crazy. Karl-Anthony Towns added 21 points of his own and 7 boards on 8 of 12 shooting. And Josh Hart had 11 points, 11 rebounds, and 9 assists. They then lost to the Warriors again by 3, as I mentioned in this one. They're third in the Eastern Conference, but they still have got to figure it out, man. They do better against weaker competition, but when it comes to facing the best of the best, it still remains the case that they just have not handled that well at all. And it's just crazy. All right. Moving on to the Thunder, who remain as the best team in the Western Conference, and over this stretch of time, they have gone 5-1. Well, 6-1. They got the action started with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander having a 51-point outing in the game against the Rockets on March 3rd that they won by 9. With that, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander would cap off the shortest span for any NBA player to nab their first 4 50-point ball games. It took Shai Gilgeous-Alexander just 19, which is much quicker than some of the greatest scorers of past generations in NBA history, which is absolutely ridiculous, and that adds to his MVP case. I mean, the very next game against the Grizzlies, he just goes right back to putting up 41 against this squad in a game that I did see play out live. The Grizzlies just had no answer for him. Not only did he have 41 points and 8 assists on 14 of 25 shooting, but it also helps when many other players are just coming in and firing up shot after shot. Jalen Williams of Arkansas made every single shot from the field. Isaiah Hartenstein had an easy 10 points. Aaron Wiggins had 16 points. And Jalen Williams of Santa Clara had 20 points in this ball game to compound on that. all while shooting 50.6, 41.7, and 89.5% splits overall. They would grab an easy win from the Trailblazers by 18 on March the 7th in a game where Aaron Wiggins actually led the way with 30 points and 5 rebounds on 13 of 26 shooting from the field and 2 threes. Arkansas, Jalen Williams actually had a double-double in this ball game. 10 points, 11 rebounds, and 11 assists on 4 of 7 shooting. And all of this was done without Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. In fact, the entire starting lineup for the Thunder would be out for this ball game. Maybe because of rest, I'm not sure. But either way, in just a few days after that, the NBA would open up an investigation into it. Not necessarily sure about what they're trying to find with that. But, hey. They then split the back-to-back against the Thunder, as I mentioned. In the first one, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander had 40 points, 5 assists, and 8 boards on 15 of 32 shooting. Definitely rough for him early on, but he turned it up late to grab the win from the Nuggets' grasp. Jalen Williams also had 26 points of his own, and Chet Holmgren had 14. In the second matchup, scoring the same amount of points and losing somehow, it would actually be Luka Doncic who led the way in scoring with 26 points on 9 of 16 shooting and 8 threes, which is not typical for Doncic, by the way. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander would have 25 points of his own and 3 threes, which is also incredibly rare for him to reach that mark, and 7 assists on 8 of 14 shooting. Isaiah Hartenstein had 20, and Alex Caruso had 13. They would beat the Celtics with a score of 118 to 112, even though Jason Tatum had a great performance of 33 points, 8 rebounds, and 8 assists in this one on total 23 shooting. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander once again stole the show. And honestly, with what he has been able to do against the Celtics, as detailed earlier on in the broadcast, I mean, it makes sense. The end of the game would see him eventually reach a mark of 5 straight ball games with at least 30 points and 5 assists versus Boston, which is tied for the most all-time. He became the 8th ever player to score 20 points in 60 straight ball games as well, and he is actually on pace to set the NBA record for that mark in a single season. It's still going at this point, by the way. And honestly, unless they just decide to rest him for the last few weeks of the season, he will more than likely get it. Even on nights where it looks like he'll struggle, he will still do just enough to reach that threshold and exceed it on many occasions. The Thunder, with this match, would also clinch a playoff berth. I'm pretty sure that the Cavs have done the same thing at this point. But with both of them being the best teams in their respective conference by far, they're definitely not going to fall out of playoff contention now. That would be something if that was even possible, but no. Chet Holmgren, for what it's worth, also added 23 points and 15 rebounds of his own in this ball game. They had great bench production, though they were relatively undermanned. And you still were able to beat the Celtics at full strength. Then in this game against the Pistons, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander had a 48-point outing this time, along with 6 assists and 3 steals on 17 of 26 shooting, 4 threes, and all 10 makes at the foul line. Cason Wallace had 20 points, Isaiah Hartenstein had 12, and Kenrich Williams had 10 points. They're just rolling. There doesn't really seem to be any slowing them down right now. It's very difficult to do that if you're any NBA team at this point. The Magic have gone 2-4 over this stretch of time, I mean, they currently sit 8th in the Eastern Conference, but honestly, they're going to have to do much more on their end in terms of actually making something out of this season. Like, even with that being said, they still have not learned how to space the floor in this time at all. And it kind of cost them in this game on March 4th, in the second night of a back-to-back series sort of pair of games between the Raptors. They lost by 1 with Coby White spoiling a 41.8 rebound and 8 assist outing from Paolo Banchero in this game after hitting the game-winning three-pointer as a rookie. All of that on 14 of 20 shooting for Banchero, while Franz Wagner put up 11 of 23 shooting and 28 points along with 5 rebounds of his own. You know, they had the slight advantage in terms of makes and percentage from the field and deep here, but Walter hit the shot that mattered the most, ultimately. Then they would have a match against the Bulls that saw Coby White clutch up, as I mentioned, and the Magic lose the game by 2. In a game where they desperately could have used a three-pointer to give them a slight edge, they shot 27.3% from fucking three-point line. It's craziness. They beat the Bucks by 2 on the 8th, as I mentioned, and then lost the Rockets by 13, prior to beating the Pelicans by 20, with Paolo putting up 34 points and 11 rebounds. Then losing their next matchup against Minnie by 7, allowing 118 points, while Banchero by himself put up 43 points and 10 rebounds. It is just tough to see that he's been on this stretch late in the season after being out for so much time. You would think that that would be an added luxury of having a player that is that great in your lineup, that maybe you're inspired to try to play some form of winning basketball again, and yet those moments have been sparse. Now maybe things could change, but they don't have much more time. Still feels, though, that if they can string together just a few more, they will probably get away with this and get in the play-in. Because the Eastern Conference, outside of the Pistons, everybody else, after the 6th seed, currently has a losing record right now. So they're probably set to be real. And that is kind of... don't know how to feel about that. The 76ers over this course of time have gone 1-6. Obviously, they did start off the month with the fluky ass win against the Warriors. Since then, they've still had Quentin Grimes produce, putting up multiple 30-point ball games for some fucking reason. And still, it hasn't been enough because they are so depleted elsewhere that they are getting beaten in any way, shape, or form, really. They've been getting blown out for the most part. They did get a close win against the Jazz. Yeah, it's the Jazz of all teams. You probably should be able to beat them. Then you lose a close ball game to the Hawks, and then you get blown out against the Raptors and Pacers. Despite efforts from everybody. I mean, it's not that they aren't playing. You know, Jeff Dalton Jr., I'm seeing here, has had some very solid performances for them. Gaston Yabusele obviously has been a good get for them, honestly. I mean, the fact that you could steal him away from France and bring him here, and he's been doing this for you this season, it's been a great sign, but it still is not enough. Because the core players that should be leading this squad are not there, and that would be made much clearer by the fact that a little after this stretch, news would break on Monday that Paul George would be out for the rest of the season so he can get his surgery. Don't know why that's breaking news. It's probably something that they already should have done, because even when he was playing, Paul George wasn't doing shit for this team. It just goes to show how much of a fucking failure that move was. And no, seriously, like, with this, people had already been doing it, but we've got to start questioning if Daryl Morey is going to be a part of this organization in the long term after a stunt like this. You know, not just him in the offseason when they made this move, but other people as well across the media were championing it and calling this a play for a potential championship run this season. And Daryl Morey especially stamped that as we got closer and closer and closer to the regular season. He had tremendous faith in this move. Now, there were a ton of people who saw right through all of the potential numbers and all of what was being displayed on paper with this team. They saw right through it, and those guys were absolutely correct about everything. They crumbled. You knew that Joel Embiid couldn't stay healthy. You knew that Paul George couldn't stay healthy. And as a result, though you have Tyrese Maxey for most of the season up until late performing well in the first year of his new extension, it felt like at moments in time he was just overwhelmed with so much because he had to carry on the burden of this damn ball club. As young as he is, he was expecting to at least be on the court with these guys who are veteran leaders. And yet he had to assume that role early in the season when other people were not there like Embiid or George. He had to be the vocal leader. And then he had to go out on a night-to-night basis and lead the team on the court with his production. And in some cases, he was able to. It's not just the injuries to Paul George or Joel Embiid, but they certainly hurt. And they are certainly a reflection of where both of those players are at in their respective careers. So to invest so heavily in that process that has not worked for over a decade now, why still trust it? Joel Embiid is who he is at this point. You would hope that he can get healthier, but realistically speaking, he just has not been available throughout his entire career. He's missed almost as many games, if not more, than he's played throughout his entire career to this point. And as he gets up there in his 30s, you really expect that to change? Then you go out and get a mid-30s player in Paul George who has dropped off from a production standpoint in at least the last couple of years prior to getting to Philly. And then you know his bad streak in the playoffs as well. But you invest deeply in that long term. Why? Why not just go for a rental instead? You're fully committed to him. And it's just going to continue to go bad. So Daryl Morey might be gone from there. I'm not going to lie to you. Like that, this is just egregious on his part. And a very egregious misfire. Moving on to the Suns, who split dead even, winning against the Clippers, Mavericks, and Kings over this stretch of time, while losing to the Nuggets and then the Grizzlies and Rockets back-to-back in the same span. They, in every single game, have allowed over 110 points. Except for the Kings game. But it's like, with a defense that is going to remain as atrocious as they have been, it is just a glaring issue that they didn't solve. Like, literally. They didn't really make any moves at the trade deadline because they put themselves in this decision. You don't have a lot of assets to move outside of getting Nick Richards back and getting Josh Okogie off your team and Yusuf Nurkic, which was smart. But that's still, though Nick Richards is solid, that's still a relatively small move compared to decisions you would have likely made with more space and more freedom in the cap. But they placed themselves in that position by forking over so much money to a trio that just, it's a very unorthodox trio. And we've seen over the years, at least the past 2 years, how these trios of players do not always pan out as expected. I mean, like, literally look at the Nuggets right now and what they've had to do. You could say that they're a quote-unquote big three with Jokic, Murray, and Westbrook. But somebody is naturally going to have to take a sacrifice. That being Westbrook. And that's where I can kind of draw a parallel to this with the Suns right now. There's a fundamental difference, though. All three of those guys in Denver, whether or not you want to call them a big three, they all have an innate ability to balance between scoring at will and getting other players on their team involved in efficient ways. Every single one of them. We know what Westbrook is capable of. Even though some of the triple-doubles might be forced, he legitimately is still a very serviceable facilitator for any ball club. His score-first mindset failed with the Lakers. Over that time, he had to shift his focus. And then he started finding bits and pieces of success. Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic were obviously going to be the core duo. You had to have Westbrook take a little bit of a backseat. Now you deal with the Suns, who have score-first guards in Booker and Beal, and potentially the most dynamic scorer of the basketball that we've ever seen in Kevin Durant. In terms of the versatility of scoring, I should say. Obviously, he's not the most prolific. But you get the idea. All those guys are trying to shoot the basketball, get in isolation situations, and get into their own spots. How, even if you are Mike Budenholzer, right? who is a defensive-minded coach, by the way, which just makes things so much more ironic for them. How do you tell any one of those guys to take a backseat and start facilitating? Even with you putting a 5-year, $251 million contract in Bradley Beal on the bench to lead the second unit. How can you realistically expect him to start facilitating well now at the age that he is at, when he's never done that in his career? And you're not going to have Kevin Durant or Devin Booker do it. So it causes a lot of confusion. They can't defend. They have a hard time stringing together multiple possessions with good, clean basketball in some of these matches. And if they were to somehow make the playoffs, would certainly hurt them in the same way it did last year. Same problems are going to flare up. Nothing's changed with them, necessarily. If anything, they're even more cap-strapped because the money in every single one of their extensions has increased in this particular season. They were potentially contemplating moving on for Kevin Durant. I don't know what you believe that you can find right now for him. And yet, with all of that being said, they are still the 11th seed in the Western Conference with just a single game behind the Mavericks because of their own drop-off of sorts. And then the Trailblazers are just a couple games behind them. So I guess their season is not done. But man, they will be an easy out if they even manage to get into any seed in the Western Conference. They will be an easy out. They just do not have it. Now moving on to the Trailblazers, as I just mentioned, they are 12th in the Western Conference after this stretch, which, again, they did win their first matchup against the 76ers, as I mentioned, with Anthony Simons going pretty crazy. But over this stretch of time, they went 1-5, with that 5-game losing streak truly hurting them. I mean, by this point, they could have already surpassed the Suns, if not for that. But at the same time, you got to give credit where credit is due. They're going up against stronger competition all across the board. Celtics, Thunder, Pistons, Warriors, and Knicks all won games against them. The Pistons game was close, and the Knicks game was certainly close. But for the most part, all those teams are elite. And we know the Pistons have been on quite the surge this season. They are definitely on a different level, a far greater atmosphere than they were at last season. So things were certainly going to be tough with that one. But for what it's worth, Deni Avdija has also been on a tear. And especially in this Warriors game here, he put up 34 points and 16 rebounds, then nabbed 15 boards in the next matchup against the Knicks. Now, with Deni Avdija doing this and being a relatively young player, I don't even think that he's 25 yet. I do wonder what this means for a guy like Jeremy Grant. Yes, Deni Avdija just turned 24 essentially with the start of the new year. So you have him going on this surge right now late. It shows promise and shows a lot of potential. I don't know if it's due to injury or what, but again, I haven't seen a lot of Jeremy Grant at all since this time. So I just wonder. They clearly at this point, with that, overpaid for him. I think we can honestly sit back and say that. He just hasn't been healthy enough for them. And even when he had been, the defense for him kind of dropped off a little bit. I mean, he was touted as a versatile two-way player with potential to at least hold it down on the offensive side of the ball. Hasn't done either one of those things relatively well as a part of this roster. And now again, he's missed all this time. In the middle of that deal. It's one they might come to regret. And especially with the fact that they've got other wings emerging as well. You've got Danny Avdija there for that defense. And now he's giving you a great amount of offensive potential, even if his shot can be iffy at times. Then again, as I mentioned in the video past, you have Tamani Kamara emerging as a defensive threat as well, offering you enough shooting to maintain a rotational spot on the offensive side of the ball. I don't know where an older Jeremy Grant, who I believe is like 30. Oh, yeah. Yeah, he's just turned 31. So he's actually a lot younger than I thought. Which I suppose makes sense. But he is only getting older in age. He has not played a really good amount of NBA games, to say the least. I mean, in every single season with Portland, his appearances have decreased. He was a solid scorer last year, but things have just dropped off completely for him in this season. So I don't know where he fits into the equation. When other players in their stock are on the rise like this, it makes it very difficult. I'll say that much. It really does. Moving on to the Kings. They currently sit as the 9 seed in the Western Conference, and over this time they went 2-5. They won by 24 against the Mavericks, and then lost by 6 to the Nuggets, as Jonas Valanciunas obviously couldn't do anything to stop Jokic. And despite DeRozan's 35 points in this one, when you have that great of a mismatch taking place in the paint, good luck with that. They beat the Spurs by 18 with Zach LaVine putting up 36 points in this ball game, and then lost to the Clippers by the single point in overtime, with DeMar DeRozan leading the way with 31 points and, shockingly enough, 10 assists, along with 7 rebounds on 9 of 20 shooting. Zach LaVine had 30 points and 7 rebounds on total 22 shooting, and Jonas Valanciunas had 9 points, 17 rebounds, and 7 assists. 3 of 10 shooting is horrible, and all 2 from the three-point line is also atrocious. That's the thing about this, too, that sucks the most. You bring in Jonas Valanciunas to give you an ability to stretch the floor, and especially with Sabonis being out during a large portion of time in this game, or during this stretch of the season, you desperately need to capture some of that element from your shooting big. A guy that has been one of the better stretch fives in the decade. Now he's just dropped off completely. He just has not been able to find his shot. Another 29-point loss to the Knicks on the very next day, ironically enough. And then they lost to the Warriors by 26, as I mentioned earlier, before dropping the back-to-back against the Suns by 16. Now, Sabonis did reappear in this ball game, and he had 11 rebounds, 12 assists, and 12 points, all on 4 of 11 shooting. I mean, that makes sense. Certainly a rough game for him, but obviously he'd been out for all that time, just trying to work himself back into it. DeMar DeRozan had 23 points, and Zach LaVine had 21 points. Moving on to the Spurs, who currently sit 13th in the Western Conference. Not only have they been on just a rough stretch over this course of time, going 2-4, but they also took another complete hit when a little after this stretch, it would be detailed that De'Aaron Fox would get season-ending surgery on his finger. Given the fact that everything was contingent on them at least having a shot at the play-in. With them being so far out of it, without much of a chance to really assert themselves as a threat to make it, De'Aaron Fox decided to handle this issue that's been taking place with, I believe, the finger on his shooting hand, and get it healed up now so that he can have a much better recovery period and a more optimal path towards ramping up action again prior to next season. At least that's how I see it. They did win by 14 against the Nets, with Devin Vassell putting up 37 points, but then lost 3 straight games to the Kings by 18, as I mentioned, by 17 to the Timberwolves, and by 4 to the Mavericks, before winning that back-to-back by 10 with De'Aaron Fox in what would be the last notable matchup of his, putting up 32 points and 11 assists with 9 boards on total 25 shooting. Honestly, you really hate to see a team go through it. They have just dealt with so much this season. When they get healthy next season, I believe that the Spurs will be fine. I mean, a lot of the other pieces are there. Wembanyama obviously took the ascent. Stephon Castle has been a godsend in whatever role they have asked him to play. And that's the crazy thing about it, too. He started in some matches. He's come off the bench in favor of CP3, and he's just been performing as a rookie. You love to see it. You can't control the diagnosis that Wembanyama had in his shoulder. You certainly can't account for a situation like what happened with Greg Popovich suffering a mild stroke and being sidelined for the rest of the season. That's not something that's really anticipated. And a lot of that stuff eventually just became bigger than basketball. It's not to say that players certainly didn't, they tried their best out there. And they fought hard in a good portion of these games. But even when things seemed to be lining up perfectly, there was always that one run that took them out of a ball game after the third quarter, or there was an injury here and an injury there that just completely halted all progress they were trying to make in a given moment. Teams go through it all the time, and the Spurs have been just the latest victim in terms of catching a really bad streak. Correction, 3-4 over this time. They did beat the Pelicans on the 15th. But still. Moving on to the Raptors, who are somehow 11th in the Eastern Conference, but again, I yeah, they're just like, oh my gosh, it is bad in the Eastern Conference. It's terrible. They literally just usurped the 76ers by a half game, despite losing their last two. It is sad, bro. Oh my gosh. Okay. Nonetheless, pertaining to the stretch that we have here, despite that 2-game losing streak, in the stretch that we're talking about, they did go 5-1 somehow. They beat the Magic by 1, the Jazz by 9, with Emmanuel quickly having a 34-point outing. They split between the Wizards with a 15-point win and a 1-point loss. Then got a 13-point ball game in the 76ers with the Canadian-born player in A.J. Lawson, hometown kid, putting up back-to-back ball games of 32 points and then 28 in Toronto. One of the more interesting developments of this time frame. The Jazz would then be beaten again by the Raptors. Again, in a battle of bats, somebody's got to win. Scotty Barnes had 20 points and 10 rebounds in this one. And for the team overall, they were able to shoot better from the field while getting themselves more opportunities, generally speaking. They dominated them in the paint. Somehow, the Jazz couldn't do anything about it. Now, granted, that had to do a lot with Walker Kessler being out of the ball game, but I digress. And yeah, moving on to the Jazz, they are wasting Walker Kessler's time. They're wasting his time. They have gone winless over this stretch from March 3rd to March 15th. Fucking winless. 0-7. And they are currently, they haven't won a game this month. They have not won a game this month. It's sad. It's sad, bro. I mean, in this game that they lost by 28 against the Pistons, you did have a guy in Kyle Filipowski from Duke come off the bench and put up 25 points and 8 rebounds and on 7 of 13 shooting with 4 threes in 24 minutes of play, which shows promise. But, you know, there are not a lot of other options out there, especially with the case being also that Lauri Markkanen has been hurt for this entire stretch of time. Even with Markkanen in there, you wouldn't win a whole bunch of ball games, but you'd probably get a couple. I mean, you would have Johnny Juzang for the Jazz, and this next ball game against the Wizards come out with a 27.7 rebound outing on 10 of 15 shooting, and Kyle Filipowski was back at it with a 23.13 rebound ball game. That still wasn't enough. Also, the Jazz appear to have called up Oscar Tshiebwe from the G League, and he strung together some solid performances, having a nice debut and then grabbing 13 rebounds off the bench in this ball game. Then you get against the Raptors, and my goodness, this game was inexcusable for the Jazz. You had Walker Kessler put up a performance that is so historic that the last player to notch this sort of stat line was Dikembe Mutombo in 1994. He had 18 points, 25 rebounds, and 8 fucking blocks. Only Dikembe Mutombo has done it in the last 30 to 31 years. You had that performance from him. And yet you still lose by 9 to the Raptors. How the fuck is that possible? Questions have got to be answered. Then you get in this matchup against the 76ers that you lose by 4, with Kyle Filipowski having another 20-point outing, this time 25 and 7 on 8 of 16 shooting. Keontae George was back at it with his inefficient ways, and missing 13 shots in a 4-point ball game especially hurt. They lost to the Celtics, obviously, despite John Collins putting up 28 points and 10 rebounds. Like, you're getting contributions from a variety of people, but you don't have the talent to compete with some of these teams when push comes to shove. You just don't. Even Bryce Sensabaugh, the Ohio State man off the bench, had 22 points on 8 of 11 shooting and 5 threes. I just don't know what gives anymore with this team, man. They lost by 7 to the Grizzlies yet again before losing to the Raptors also by 8 this time. It's just sad, man. And then the Wizards, somehow, someway, despite being the worst team in the Eastern Conference, have still strung together some pretty good wins over this time. I mean, they, over this time, have gone 4-3. They did lose to the Heat by 16, as I mentioned. But not only did they beat the Jazz and the Raptors for a short 2-game winning streak prior to going on a 2-game losing streak to the Raptors in the second game of that respective series, and then the Pistons by 20. They managed to get strong wins against the Pistons in the second matchup between the two on March 13th. And then it culminated in a March 15th outing against the Nuggets that not only saw them get the season sweep, not only saw them knock off the Nuggets at the end of the ball game with a buzzer beater, but saw Alex Saw from France have quite possibly his best game of the season as a rookie in a year where the draft class isn't really being talked about that much, and for good reason, because the production hasn't really been there, and that was going to be how it was. I mean, this was stated during the draft process that this class was going to be weaker, but Alex Saw had been struggling for the longest time, and as a project player, that's how it was going to be. Still, in this one, playing up against Nikola Jokic, he had 34 points and 5 threes, along with 6 rebounds and 5 assists. You had Jordan Poole put up 19 points, including, I believe, a stretch of 9 points late in the fourth quarter alone, including the game-winning shot. Keyshawn George also had 19. And then Julian Champagnie, for what it's worth, had fucking 16 and 13. Oh, Justin Champagnie. Jeez. 16 and 13 for Justin Champagnie on 6 of 10 shooting and 2 threes. I don't know how they did it, but they have managed to reach this point. Maybe it's the highlight of their season, but everything else has just been absolutely terrible for them. No way to get around that. Now, I do have, after this stretch, a few things that I did miss in terms of overall developments. So I suggest to just get to them now. Going back to my earlier rant on all of these damn people in the media that will try to save LeBron's face whenever he faces situations that could cause harm to his ego or reputation. There may not be a person more synonymous with that in the media space right now, in the sports industry, sports broadcasting industry, than Reggie Miller. You can turn on any TNT broadcast you'd like. You could turn on any game that you want. If it's a Lakers game, you know what time it is with him. He will nonstop bring him up and praise him at pretty much every turn. If something goes terribly wrong on a play where LeBron clearly fucks something up, Reggie Miller will try to tell you exactly why blame should go elsewhere. Or that LeBron isn't capable of doing something that bad. Something along those lines every time in a Lakers game. And when it's any other game, a clear disinterest might be there, depending on how bad it really is. And from then on, he will pivot and talk about how the Lakers are doing and how LeBron is doing this and how he is the greatest player of this generation, how he's an old man still doing all of this to the younger generation. Everything along those lines that you can think of, he's probably said more often than not. Still, all things considered, even with that being said, he is an individual that can provide valuable insights to these broadcasts as a color commentator and as a person who was highly accomplished as a player in the league, especially as a three-point specialist. Obviously, his Pacers teams weren't really that successful. That could be attributed to many other things. But he's a pretty good color commentator if you just cast all that shit out of the window. Nonetheless, with TNT losing the rights to the NBA next season, Reggie Miller had also alluded to the fact that he would probably want to move on elsewhere also. So, with that being said, NBC would announce that they would hire Reggie Miller next season as a talent for their NBA on NBC programming as the lead analyst. My thing on that is that while I think it's a good move, that wording is a little interesting. Why do I say that? Typically, when you're thinking about a lead analyst, you're looking at an on-air talent for a specific program. Obviously, with inside the NBA moving to ESPN, NBC will probably be trying to create some type of pregame show of their own. And so obviously, with how things look like now, it appears that Reggie Miller would be taking on that responsibility. I have a feeling, though, that they are trying to find an individual who is very desired in their eyes for the position of color commentator alongside Mike Tirico. If they were planning to have Reggie Miller pair up with Mike Tirico, they would have explicitly said so, in my opinion. They wouldn't say lead analyst. That could change over the course of the next few months if they don't find the talent that they're looking for to get on the A team, I guess. Because also, you have to think about this too. There are definitely going to be a pool of teams to choose from. NBC is definitely going to do as best as they can with covering different games in different places, obviously. They do plan to do a kind of thing that the NFL does with Thursday Night Football, where I think some games will be simulcast on Prime and on Twitch. So you have that broadcast going on, but then for other people who may want to watch another game at another time, you're probably looking at them trying to acquire more talent in that regard, whether it be a play-by-play guy outside of Mike Tirico to handle, I guess, games that are not necessarily primetime. Obviously, all of the games that are primetime ball games involving pretty good NBA teams are going to be covered by Tirico and whoever they have at play-by-play. Or whoever they have at color commentator. This talent could really be anyone. You know, I don't think they've probably got people in mind, but this hasn't been made explicitly clear, and I would say for obvious reasons. It has been a long ass time and a long time coming for NBC to have rights to the NBA. Something tells me that they want to do this the right way. So giving off those kinds of leads, especially if they're looking for a color guy who is really fucking good at what he does. It can also be any general person. Doesn't have to necessarily be a man or woman thing. But they could be really fucking good at their job, and to spoil that, then we then bring on a subsequent sort of sweepstakes in which they might lose out on that potential candidate for the color position. They couldn't really risk that right now. So again, like, even without saying anything, as I stated, things could fall through either way. And then they may consider altering Reggie Miller's role into an analyst / color guy. All in all, to have him there is pretty good, in my opinion, overall. With how he had been performing for the Timberwolves during some of the games in the last video that I covered, and also during this stretch, the Timberwolves converted Jaylen Clark's two-way deal to a 2-year NBA contract, which is pretty fucking respectable indeed. To have that happen, it's a testament to what he's been able to do in this stretch of time, and it does show that, you know, if you give someone an opportunity, just how far they can eventually take things. You don't even necessarily have to be the highest recruited player ever. You don't have to be the best. You just come in, you work hard, you put in the effort, and you produce. There's nothing really stopping you from ascending into a respectable place in the NBA standing. That's how it goes. And that will do it for this one. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.